Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of Finance and Corporate Services to order. Could I get a mover for the consent items? Moved by Councillor Schneider. Any questions on the consent items? Councillor Gazzola.
I have a couple of questions on the second item. I don't know to do with that extension of the consulting agreement. Where's the source of funding for this project from?
Mr. Tyagi, I believe it was detailed in the financial implications. Mr. Tyagi?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the source of funding will be development charges and also upfront funding directly by the developer.
So it's basically, though, totally development charges. Yeah. Okay, that's the other thing was I noticed that the main contract is $10 million. How does that relate to what we have budgeted for that project?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't catch the last part of the question.
No, it states in the report that the tender was let for $10 million. I'm just curious as to how that amount of money relates to what was budgeted for the project.
The total amount for the project will be within the budget, that money that is available, if that's the question.
Well, that's I wondered. I see that it's good to understand that it's within the budget, but what was the budget? Was the budget 12 million? Was it 11 million? Yeah, I'm just curious as to how we're doing with it. The other question that really concerns me, there seem to be an awful lot of changes here. Who is responsible for all of that? Why are all these changes? A lot of changes seem to be coming down to us from senior levels of government after we've moved forward. How do we prevent this in the future?
Mr. Taggy?
Through you, Mr. Chair, what happens is projects that are complicated, the project scopes are basically established at a point during the environmental assessment phase, and the design at that time is not really advanced to the point where we could determine the number of requirements that may come forth during the detailed design phase. In this particular case, it's really not so much as the requirements from the senior levels of government. It's the major contributing factor is the number of days that the construction project will take. I think in the report it points out that instead of 240 days, the project will take about 360 days for construction. And one of the reasons for that is that during detailed design stage, after geotechnical investigation was completed, it was determined, for example, that instead of the open cut, the method for constructing the sewer line will be through tunneling. So that obviously changed the scope of the project from what was established when the consultant was retained for the project. So that's just one example as to the type of change that will trigger the increase in the design cost and also the construction cost, construction inspection cost.
Well, I've just, in reading the reports, it talks about the Ministry of the Environment putting additional and previously unaccounted requirements on the table. I just want that's actually what I was referring to.
Councillor Fernandez?
Yeah, I have a number of questions that I sent to Mr. Tyagi, which cannot be answered at this time because Mr. Gross is away. So I'm going to ask a couple more questions, but I would like to put a deferral on this. The project can continue. This is really additional funding and additional, because of the additional time. But one of the concerns I have is the due diligence by MM Group. They should have been aware of the Ministry of the Environment's monitoring requirements, and I'm very puzzled as to why that wasn't part of the detailed design or part of the environmental assessment.
Chair,
Mr.
as
Taylor?
I mentioned earlier, the ministry requirement is really not a major factor in terms of why the consulting cost has gone up. In terms of the questions that were raised with me by the councillor during the weekend, my preference will be if it were the wish of the council to go back last 2 years or 3 years as to how many consultant POs have been extended, by what amount, for what region. I think that research will have to be taken by clerk's staff, and it will require quite a bit of time commitment. We certainly will do that if that's the wish of council, but I will prefer that direction to come from council. I certainly can answer questions with respect to this particular project, but in terms of the history, as I said, that will require some work, and mostly by clerk's department and other staff. So if that's the wish of council, then I would prefer a motion by council so that we can commit the staff time required to carry out the research.
Yeah, I'll be happy to put that motion forward as well as the. I spoke to Mr. Spear about this, and my understanding is that the soils around the project and the tunneling were not what they had anticipated, which created additional problems and additional work. Additionally, the concern around the historic residence of where all this work is being done, there have been additional costs there as well. So in lieu of the fact that Mr. Gross is not here and not able to answer some of the questions that I have, I'd like to put a deferral on the table just till next week until council, just so that those questions can be answered and responded to. And then additionally, put a motion forward that the council has an understanding about the number of times that we've had to extend our POs with regards to projects in the last year to 2 years.
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly if council decides to defer this project for next week, we'll obviously be respectful of that decision. But in my view, I think we can provide enough information on this particular project. As I said, in terms of the history, that really shouldn't have any bearing on the decision council may want to make excuse me, on this particular project.
And I would agree with you, Mr. Tiegi. I don't think that motion, the second part, should have no bearing on this particular project, but I think the questions that I asked you, which included extra work that needed to be resolved, the resident issues, how did that affect this additional PO, and how is this going to affect the eventual outcome when this comes for credit for refund, when that comes to the timeline that we have to pay out for that. How is this additional PO going to affect that? Because my understanding is that when this project would originally have come out of our capital budget, we will have to pay back, or I'm not exactly sure how that all works, but this is going to be additional monies that maybe we hadn't accounted for.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think I can answer that part of the question. I think if you look at the project, there are two components to the project: the pumping station itself, excuse me, and the sanitary sewer. In terms of the sanitary sewer, that part of the project is 100% funded by the developer at this time. So there's no issue, as far as I know, in terms of any future cost to the city, because 100% of the cost of the sanitary sewer will be recovered now as we pay the amount to the contractor or the consultant. In terms of the pumping station, yes, that is being funded through the development charges, and there will be recovery and payment back to the developer, I think by year 2020, I believe, if I'm not wrong, but sometime in the future. but it will have no impact on the capital budget because you may recall that just a couple of weeks ago we had another report where we had a surplus of about $600,000 because of the design change. So some of these projects, some projects will come under, some will come over, and in the end, if at any time we felt that there will be deficit, we certainly bring that to Council's attention. But I'm certainly not concerned at this point in time that will have any direct impact on capital budget because of the approval of this report.
Okay, well, I'm running short of time, so I think I'm either going to have to come back, but my deferral motion stands in terms of deferring it until next week so that we have I have a fuller understanding. Possibly other council members may want, Councillor Gazzola had some questions. I'm not sure if other council members have questions. It's only a week. The project is going to continue. I understand. My understanding from Mr. Spear is that will continue. This is just ensuring that we have funding for the additional 120 days.
Okay. Councillor Marsh.
My question is not regarding number 2. So is that okay, or should we finish that topic first?
No, go ahead with whatever question you have in the consent items.
Okay. So I have a question with regard to 3-1. And so, Mr. Reedman, I wonder if I could ask you to answer. It's regarding the left turn from Green Street onto Park Street being prohibited during the rush hour traffic in the afternoon. And I'm curious as to whether or not we've thought about how cars trying to get southeast, getting back over to Glasgow towards Westmount Road, I'm wondering if we've thought about how they might do that if they're not permitted to do that on Green Street. I'm just worried about traffic entering into the Mount Hope Street or possibly cutting through the KCI parking lot and putting children or youth in danger.
Mr. Reedman.
Through the chair, so some people are taking King Street right down to the end at Green Street, which is the last point to make a turn. So some people shift their travel patterns and not take that route through. A lot of people will have to turn right and then make their way back through the neighborhood. It's not an ideal situation, but based on the issues that are at hand with the LRT construction, we've looked at a bunch of different options for it, and this is the best available opportunity to mitigate some of the concerns with the left-turn vehicles and the queuing that's occurring at that intersection.
Okay, so if we go ahead with this one, I just would encourage staff to monitor the KCI parking lot and see how traffic patterns might be trying to cut through from Green over to Glasgow. Also, just wondering if you had considered implementing a temporary three-way stop. Would that be something that could work?
Through the chair, we wouldn't recommend a three-way stop on a temporary basis at this location. We think the right turn or the left turn restriction should satisfy most of the issues.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Yaneski.
Yeah, same topic, and similar to the questioning of Councillor Marsh. And I go to McLaren Arena quite often, and at the hospital as well as being on the board meeting there. So is the traffic that's coming through along Green through traffic from King or wherever, or is that traffic that's generated people exiting from the hospital parking garage and area?
Through the chair, we haven't done a full study to find out where the sources are coming from, but having traveled down that street, that's sort of that is the last available opportunity with the current detouring that's up to turn left or right from King Street. So a lot of traffic is going down to Green Street and then making that right to go through. So there would be a mix, but I can't give you a specific split without doing a formalized study.
No, I can appreciate that, because I thought sometimes you see the source of the problem, and sometimes because of the construction, you don't have any options, sort of thing. And the other concern that came down, as everybody just alluded to, was the shortcut, as I would see it, right through the down McLaren Arena parking lot over to Glasgow Street. People, if they're going to be queued up, I mean, that's what I would do. So I'm not sure whether you would address that somehow or not. So I'm just leaving that as an open-ended question.
Okay, there are no further questions. We will deal with the deferral item first. It's been moved that item number 2 be deferred to next Monday. And recorded vote's been called. So again, we're dealing with item number 2, deferring to next Monday. Those in favor? Opposed? The deferral carries. It will be dealt with at council. And the balance of the items, those in favor? And opposed? None opposed. Very good. Okay, we will move to... Oh, question, Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah, you had stepped out when I had asked about part of the questions that I had asked Mr. Tiegi was about the number of times we've had to do PO extensions in the last year to 2 years. Would you prefer if I wrote out that motion and brought it forward after we deal with the other items?
I'll look to staff. Is it clear enough? And is it something that I'm not sure if staff agreed? I was stepped out for a moment. Apologies. I had a minor family emergency. Did staff agree to that, or would you be looking for motion? Mr. Taggy.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think I do know what what information councillor is asking for, but perhaps just to be absolutely certain if there could be a written motion, and also I'm a bit concerned about. And depending upon how far back we go and what the extent of this review is going to be, it certainly has implications with respect to the staff timing, and it will require commitment from the staff to go back and research all the reports that have gone to council or committee of council on any PO extensions in the last whatever number of years we need to look at.
Okay.
So my preference will be, yes, through a motion of council, because I don't have problem in terms of answering council's questions, which could be answered fairly quickly, looking at the information which is available right away. But when it comes to doing a research going back a number of years, my preference is that it be done through council motion, because then council is aware of the staff time implications.
Okay, very good. Councillor Fernandez, then, so would you want to write it up and deal with it after the next item?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay. So we will move to item number 4. Before we begin, I just wanted to note that this is probably the last time we'll see Pat Harris at committee. I understand Pat's been with the city for about 37 years. She's been in finance and planning, but spent most of her time in licensing, where she's been the manager for the last 10 years. So just wanted to wish Pat, on behalf of council, the best of luck in her retirement. And I'm also, I've been very content with your work over the years, and we wish you all the best of luck. Okay. So the item we will be dealing with is we're looking at actually disbanding not the Canadian Senate, but the Liquor License Application Review Committee. So, Ms. Harris.
The recommendation to council is to disband the Liquor License Review Committee. It has worked well for the city since 1999, but recently the AGCO is moving in another direction, more risk-based, and they have informed staff that they will no longer be putting the standard conditions that we have requested onto liquor licenses. Therefore, we won't have any enforcement of the standard conditions through the AGCO. So it is being recommended that the committee be disbanded. Also, there aren't as many bar seats in the downtown. This committee was put in place when there were all kinds of problems in the downtown with numerous bars and damage to property, etc., and those concerns aren't as great as they were back in the early 2000s.
Okay, there are a number of questions, starting with Councillor Ioannidis.
Yes, through you, Chair Davey. My question is, I'm okay with this being disbanded and everything else. Really, we never really had much of an issue, but I just want to know if there's any form of a mechanism to let us know whether or not when that balance is sort of. We don't want to go back to the day when we had bars and on every corner. So how can we measure that or be notified of when things are starting to sort of tip towards the other way?
I believe that will probably be up to staff and the downtown, the economic development and the downtown management to determine whether there are going to be problems coming up. This began when the police came to staff and complained that there were numerous costs to the problems in the downtown, and the bars weren't cooperating. So I believe that between the police and staff, they would definitely come back to council if there were problems.
Okay. Mr. Bloom, do you want to add?
Through the chair, just to add that staff meet with police once a month, and the police meet with the downtown BIA board once a month, providing updates. So I suspect on one of those two occasions, the police will be the first to red flag to us that things are going in the wrong direction.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Schneider?
Yes, so as I understand this, any conditions that we would want to put on a license, the AGCO will not recognize anyway?
For the most part, they have told us the standard conditions that we have been asking for, they're not prepared to put on the liquor license anymore. The only one they would consider is the hours of operation, but council would have to have very strong reasons why that condition would have to be put on the liquor license.
Okay, and I understand that our bar seat numbers have gone down, but I have a concern that after the ION is constructed that those numbers could go up again. So it'd be nice to have some sort of mechanism where, you know, our concerns can be heard. So I'm not sure if that's possible.
I believe, again, if there are concerns with the bars, etc., again, the police would be the first ones that would let staff know, and in turn, we would let council know.
Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure that we're proactive in this. Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola?
I just want to try to understand. In the report, it states that there were 17,000 bar seats, and it says nightclubs and bar seats made up 60% of this. What is there, in addition to nightclubs and bar seats, that make up the other 4,000 seats now?
The other 4,000 seats would have been restaurants.
Okay, so those are eating places basically, as opposed to people going there for entertainment.
That's correct.
What is a place like? I'm just trying to understand the difference between a restaurant and these bar seats that you're counting. Leave it. I'll come back to that. Is there such a standard of best practices as to the number of bar seats in a community? Because I hear a number of people are concerned about the number of bar seats. So what's a good number? I take it we don't know. So.
Anyone want to take a stab at that? Mr. Bloom?
Through the chair, I think from what we've learned, the problem isn't necessarily the number of bar seats, it's how and when they let out at the end of the night. So you could have, 80 places with 40 seats each that let out at different times, and you don't have issues. It's the major bars that might house 1,000 people all at once, and they all flood out to the street at once. I think the problem we had historically was you'd have 3 or 4 in a block. The block that rocks, for example, all letting out at the same time, and that's where the problems arose. So it's more about location and proximity and ability to manage the crowd.
Okay, that's fine. So it's not the number of bar seats, it's the question here. The other question that I had was, on the hours on the closing hours, I just assumed that was covered by provincial liquor laws. Is that not the case? Do we have the opportunity to overrule that?
Ms. Harris?
We had the opportunity to ask that it be put on the liquor license as a condition of them obtaining a liquor license for a downtown bar. Up until recently, the AGCO was putting that condition on if the council asked for it. They are still prepared to put that on, but they are very adamant that the reasons have to be very clear before they are willing to add that condition onto the.
Well, I'm surprised that we have the authority to overrule the provincial law.
We don't overrule the provincial law. It was a request by council that this condition be added to the liquor license. The AGCO still could determine whether they were going to add that condition to the liquor license. In most cases, they did.
Okay, so you're basically saying that if there's some really, really good reason that they would still consider it in the future. My final question deals with, do you have any idea how much time, like we had a committee here that had 4 out of the 5 people on the committee were staff people. How much time has our staff spent, would our staff spend on these sort of issues?
It depends on the applicant. Depends if there are issues. Recently, basically, we've been able to do it through email and have discussions about the committee. I would write the reports, so it could take, an hour or 2 in the course of, whenever we would get an applicant. It depends how many restaurants in the downtown, how many applicants we get in the course of a year.
But it sounds like it isn't a lot of time, or it is a bit of time, or...
Well, it depends how many applicants we get in a year.
So we can't reduce one staff member in our complement? That's fine, thank you.
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. So, following up on Councillor Gazzola's question, I'm just curious, aren't there set provincial laws in place about what time liquor could be served between the start time and the end time?
Yes. Last call was 2 a.m.
Okay, so that would not change if we move this motion, right?
No, because the provincial regulations state 2 a.m.
Okay, and then further to the earlier discussion with Councillor Ioannidis and Councillor Schneider, I'm just curious, about the this idea that staff and police will probably bring it up if there's another problem, but I mean the problem didn't get looked at until it really was the last time round. It was an overt problem, and I'm just wanting to see, if there's going to be an opportunity, perhaps this is a question for Mr. Bloom, is there an opportunity to have this as a standing item that is looked at every 6 months or something, so that we make sure that we are proactive?
Mr. Bloom.
Through the chair, I think probably more reasonably on an annual basis we can look at it. My sense is that we wouldn't even raise a red flag until we see an actual nightclub, an application for a new nightclub, which we haven't had for a while. All of the nightclubs currently are operated by one company who, by and large, are cooperative and try their best to make sure they mitigate issues. I think where we may start being a little more concerned is if we get new operators running nightclubs as opposed to restaurants or pubs who maybe don't have the same track record and history that the current company operating them has. So I think that's really the red flag that we would look for.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just one question myself. I just want to be 100% clear. So the AGCO is ignoring 4/5 of our current conditions, but the third one again, stopping the ability to stop serving alcohol at an earlier time or different times. If we approve the disbanding of this committee, would we still be able to revive that portion of the condition in the future, or does that waive that as well?
You could revive it in the future. Again, it would be up to the AGCO to determine whether they were going to actually put that condition on the liquor license.
Okay, that helps. Councillor Hernandez indicated he'd like to move this. Any comments? Okay. Those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Okay, we'll now go back to Councillor Fernandez's motion before we step into the election debrief. Yeah, no, that's fine. It's very clearly written. I'm just making sure I understand. Those extensions. Okay, is everyone clear on the motion, Councillor Fernandez, to speak to it?
Yeah, the reason I'm asking this is the number of times, I mean, last week I had challenged a consultant tender that was over $200,000 because we felt we had the expertise in-house at the time. And one of the reasons, my understanding, that we hire consultants is because they have the expertise, they have the due diligence, they have the ability to sign off on projects. If we are seeing this as a pattern in terms of consistently extending purchase orders, I think we may need to, maybe we should be doing a bit of a review on how we're deciding on tenders and how we're deciding on consultants. Group, which is the consultant for this particular project, has the expertise of Ecoplans, which was one of the strongest environmental consulting firms that we leaned on years ago when we talked about Jefferson salamander and endangered species. So really, I find that it's concerning to me, and I think it should be concerning to council if we're constantly being asked to extend purchase orders, especially if consultants are supposed to have that expertise.
Okay, so is the scope of this will be limited to consultants then?
Yes,
Okay.
limited to consultants.
Okay, so it's not explicit, but if without having to rewrite it a bunch of times, if it can just be noted in the minutes, that's with respect to consultants. I don't see any other comments or questions. I will just say I'm inclined to support this. I would only add that, again, without going into amendments and that sort of thing, I would like to see a full picture in terms of, obviously, I don't think it's really going to help us too much if it comes back saying this is the number and this is what it cost versus how many, like what the percentage in terms of the overall number of consultant requests are and how they come back. So that needs to be sort of in perspective with that respect, if it's understood. Okay.
I just didn't want to make it too complex because Mr. Tiegi suggested that it was going to take too much time. I mean, I would think that we would have a fairly good handle. We've got a great computer system that should be able to pull up those POs pretty quickly. I'm sure we have some great staff who are experts at those kind of things too.
So move then. Those in favor? And that carries. Okay, we now will move to item number 5, which is the election debrief. Before turning it over to Ms. Tarling, I just wanted to touch on a couple key points on council's role, essentially, where this is concerned. It is in the report, but I think it bears repeating that the clerk here has a statutory role on elections, so that really limits council's role to things like dates and times for advanced polls. So it's really not appropriate for council to provide direction beyond our jurisdiction under the Municipal Election Act. That notwithstanding, the clerk's obviously interested in hearing our perspective, our feedback. So I just think it's very important that this is more of an opportunity for us to provide what we think went well, what we think didn't go well in terms of the election, as opposed to things like we should have a election poll here, which is entirely inappropriate. So hopefully council sort of understands that context, and with that I will turn it over to Ms. Tarling.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of council. In December 2014, council asked staff to provide a debrief report with respect to the 2014 election. And while the statutory responsibility for the election rests with the clerk, the debrief report before you provides a transparent assessment of the 2014 election process. It should be noted that at the December 15, 2014 council meeting, Councillor Fernandez put forward a motion relating to the election. I believe that the substance of that motion is incorporated in the motion in this report, and I will speak to that a little bit later in my presentation. Planning for, organizing, and executing the municipal election involved 18 months of planning and over 450 people working at 79 polls. It is a monumental task to facilitate over 147,000 eligible electors and requires the cooperation and collaboration of many city staff and external organizations such as the school boards. The summary statistics on this slide provide some context for the information in the report. The Election Steering Committee was responsible for the 2014 municipal election and was comprised of members from Legislative Services, IT, Purchasing, and Communications. The Steering Committee felt it was important to have a vision statement to act as the foundation for the election, and so crafted the one before you on this particular slide. From that vision statement, the Election Committee made a commitment to 7 principles to guide decision making. This slide provides a quick overview of some of the major accomplishments for each of the guiding principles, but is by no means meant to be comprehensive. Having a legally binding election was paramount. Being fair and equitable for voters was also extremely important, and although it isn't mentioned, those principles were also applied to our candidates. Openness and transparency were hallmarks of this election, as was continuous improvement. Issues and challenges were brought to our attention by a number of stakeholders in the weeks and days leading up to the election. Post-election, we also actively sought feedback from a number of groups, including workers, candidates, and school board staff. All feedback has been compiled and is reflected in some manner in the areas of improvement for 2018. As we heard consistent messages, the report has been organized according to 8 major themes. For each of these 8 themes, the report outlines new initiatives that were undertaken for the 2014 election. Many of these were citizen-centric, aimed at improving the voter experience at the polls, and took into account feedback we had received from 2010. The report openly acknowledges the challenges we experienced, but staff were exceptional at resolving quickly those which were within our direct control. Being anticipatory helped, as did being flexible in our thinking. In 2014, there was a lot that went exceptionally well, and the result was the majority of voters voted with minimal or no problems. The report also lists 52 areas to be investigated to improve for the 2018 municipal election. I won't go into the details of the key themes as the information is in the report, but I will highlight a few things. The issues experienced with the voters list were anticipated since they've been ongoing for years. And so we did what we could to address the problem, including facilitating voters to add themselves to the list via our new online software, VoterView. We intend to maintain the information in that system to the best of our ability. We also intend on participating in any consultations concerning the voters list, and will look for other methods to improve our list. People who are not on the voters list are unable to receive voter notification cards, which is why we actively encourage people to check if they were on the list and to add themselves. We had some reports of the late delivery of voter notification cards, but an investigation by Canada Post has not revealed any reason for why this happened. Despite this, we will definitely have our voter notification cards sent out earlier in 2018. The process for determining the voting locations took from August of 2013 to almost June of 2014 and involved staff from Legislative Services, Building, Community Services, and GIS in collaboration with the school boards and the region's social services staff. The report lists some 11 criteria that we used in determining voting locations, including being AODA compliant. Despite all the testing, there were some issues with the tabulators, but they were resolved by staff or our Dominion technician, and only one machine had to be replaced on election day. But this is why we always ensure that we have backup tabulators available. We improved on the 2010 ballot design, and for the most part, voters found the ballots to be easy to read, understand, and fill out. Some voters reported issues with the size of the checkboxes, so this is something we will look to address in 2018. Staff were facilitative in helping people fill out proxy votes, but we recognize that additional after-hours services could be beneficial. Involving staff and citizens in the election is an important way we enable them to exercise their civic duty beyond just voting. Technology has added a degree of complexity, and there is now a need to increase the skill sets required. This will be addressed further in 2018. The training and tools we provided in 2014 to our workers were greatly enhanced from 2010, and feedback from our election workers indicates they were extremely pleased with the training they received, and their conduct at the voting location shows training was very effective. Staff provided excellent support to candidates, voters, and election workers using a variety of communication mediums, including a very much improved election website. Having a communication plan and coordinating with other communication professionals in the region was a smart way to stretch our budget dollars and to lend a stronger voice to promoting the election overall. I've already spoken to the benefits of having a vision statement and guiding principles for the steering committee, but starting early, meeting often, and providing opportunities for growth and development to staff were extremely effective in keeping us on track, on time, and under budget. We also benefited from the collective knowledge of everyone around the table. Together, we truly are better, and having input and assistance from other city staff enabled us to leverage their expertise as well. And although not mentioned as a key theme, our partnerships with other stakeholders such as the region and school boards was advantageous, and it will be important to strengthen those relationships for 2018. In conclusion, an initiative of this size always poses challenges, and where we could, we were proactive. As issues came to our attention, staff did an excellent job of resolving them via agile thinking and creative problem solving. They were extremely responsive. Candidates and voters received answers to their questions and inquiries within 24 hours, if not immediately, and everyone received a response. On election day, the clerk's main line was staffed from 8:30 a.m. to 9 p.m., and in the days following the election, some 40 or so inquiries were answered. Our many successes are attributed to the excellent planning that took place and executing on that plan with good decision-making based on our guiding principles. Never content with the status quo, though, we are committed to continuous improvement for 2018, which will be achieved through collaborating with our partners and consulting with our key stakeholders so we are aware of their needs. As noted at the beginning of my presentation, Councillor Fernandez put forward a motion in December concerning the use of schools and the need to improve the voters list. Because we are now aware the province is planning consultations on possible changes to the Municipal Elections Act, and AMCTO is planning to take concrete action to try to address the issues with the voters list. The motion before you captures Councillor Fernandez's intention in light of these new initiatives, which were not known back in December. So I thank you very much for your time today, and Mr. Goodeve and I would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Very good, thank you. And I would just again direct Council's attention to Appendix A, which begins on 519, which has the comprehensive list of, I believe it's 52 areas to look at going forward. So there are many questions, starting with Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. So we have this motion on the table, and I absolutely agree with this motion. I also want to add a couple of minor amendments, and so I'm wondering if we could put those up on the screen. And just while the clerk is putting that up on the screen, I want to give a little bit of context about that. So I think that the motion is excellent. except it does emphasize, in particular, those the Municipal Elections Act be reviewed, in particular those relating to potential improvements to the municipal voters lists. And while I agree that is a very important aspect, I think that we need to remember that a year ago, the previous council approved unanimously a motion following the Compass Kitchener's voter turnout report. And in that motion, there were a couple other items that were highlighted. And I want to make sure going forward that we're really clear in our direction to staff. And so my amendment is just the same motion, but instead we add a number in front of potential improvements to municipal voters lists, and then we add number 2, potential for allowing municipal candidates to include website and biographical information on the municipality's website, and number 3, potential to allow all permanent residents to vote in municipal elections. And I absolutely appreciate that the clerk's office and their team, the steering committee, has done an excellent job on working towards continuous improvement. And so, to that end, just to emphasize that city staff continue their ongoing work plan to increase voter turnout, which is to be undertaken on a regular basis between municipal elections.
Okay, thank you. So before getting to this, so what we'll do then is we'll take Councillor Marsh and Councillor Schneider as the movers of the recommendation with this added on. When we get to that, we're still going to have to go through some questions with staff first. Sure. I would only point out, and I'll look for the staff to comment after, I'd just look for, I think at least item number 1 is already incorporated in the report, and I'm not sure about numbers 2 and 3. So you might want to stroke out item number 1 because that part's redundant, the other 2 are not.
That's true, yeah. So I wrote it out so that this is the amended motion in its entirety. Yep.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So we'll continue with questions now. Actually, I'm happy this is up here so we can get questions of the way on this as well. Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, thanks. A couple of concerns that I had, and I wanted to address them, was we talked about, and in the previous report, and I'm sure it's in this report, but I went back to the original report in March. Trinity Village was one area that was identified in terms of the fact that the timing was different. There's a possibility we may have lost quite a few votes because when people go someplace and they find out that they can't get in, they're just going to go home. How have we addressed that in this? I mean, we're talking about advocacy and consultation, but I'll leave it at that.
Ms. Tarling?
So in terms of addressing that going forward, there are a couple of items within the report that speak to that specifically, which includes making sure that we're working and coordinating more closely with the institutions themselves so that we completely understand which facilities comprise those particular institutions, and as well to make sure that we're working closely with the staff at those institutions so that they know exactly what the hours are going to be for their particular institution, and we have that communicated outwards to their particular residents.
Okay. In my motion, I talked about the schools, and I think we talked about the possibility of PD days, and that's in here as well. Is it not in all the 52 points in the appendix? Yes. Okay. One thing I didn't see was about ESL, so English as a second language. Is there an opportunity for us to have people located at some of these polling stations who may have, especially if it's an identifiable English as a second language area, because we do have some of those areas in the city. Is it possible to have somebody who's working at these polls who has English as a second language connected with these residents in that area?
Where we know that there may be some high concentrations of folks where English is not their second language, we do try to match up some of our election workers with respect to working at those polling locations so that they can be on hand to assist.
Okay. I'm glad to see that Councillor Marsh's motion talks about the municipal candidates' websites and biographical information being connected to a municipal website. I think that's really critical. That link, being able to link it, everybody goes there. The other question I had was, do we survey the election workers after all the work is after the election is done? Do we have a debrief with them and get them to answer some questions?
Yes, so as my report mentions, we actually did 2 surveys. We did a survey out to all of our managing deputy returning officers, and we did a separate survey out to the other election worker positions. And I'm pleased to report that we got a fairly high response rate. And so, yes, all of that information is being compiled and will be reflected in some way, shape, or form to the changes and continuous improvement initiatives for the 2018 election.
Okay, I apologize for asking a question that I read it, but it didn't obviously stick.
It's been
My
a
last
while.
question was an issue that I had brought to the clerk's attention about an occurrence that happened at the Huron Heights polling station. How have we addressed that?
We are going to be working, let me back up. We just finished meeting with both the Catholic and the public school boards, and we have a commitment from them on both boards to work with us starting earlier in the process in 2017 to make sure that we're identifying any specific issues concerning any particular school, and also just to coordinate the whole process for 2018. So I believe that could be very helpful in addressing some of the issues that we found out about throughout the process of the election day on October 27th.
Okay, this didn't relate really specifically to a school. It related to a municipal worker, and what once the polling station closed, what the election workers were told to do with ballots that were incomplete or had been rejected.
So it is inevitable that despite all the training that we do, that sometimes election workers have some questions with respect to what their process should be. So we will definitely be strengthening that going forward for 2018. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I mean, my understanding is it wouldn't have made a difference on the outcome, but what's concerning to me is that ballots were handled by a worker in a manner that was probably not respectful of the election process, and we're not sure whether ballots were changed in any shape or form. That continues to be a bit of a concern to me, and it's still an outstanding question as to how we address that.
So absolutely, we did an investigation of that particular issue, and we did note that there was somewhat of a deviation from the practice and the procedure that the staff were trained on. We definitely will be redoubling our efforts in 2018 to make sure that the staff who are at the polls do understand what the process is supposed to be. We're looking at some other options in terms of how ballots might be handled to mitigate that, and perhaps not have staff handle those ballots at all, and perhaps bring them back here to City Hall for staff here to be managing. So that's something that we'll be looking at so that we make sure that in the future we mitigate that type of risk.
I understand my time is up, but it's a very quick question. They should be able to answer yes or no. There was some confusion about whether candidates can be scrutineers at polling stations. Is that allowed or not allowed?
Mr. Goodeve?
Through Chair Davey, yes, candidates can be scrutineers. The Act states that you can only have one person either representing the candidate or acting on behalf of the candidate at any polling location. So if a candidate does enter a polling location, any scrutineers who are in the building representing the candidate must leave, and then that candidate could act as a scrutineer.
Okay, thank you.
If I may also add that scrutineer, the candidate does have to sign in, though, with the MDRO so that they are acknowledging they are there as a scrutineer.
Okay. Councillor Yaneski?
I'm glad that we are doing a debrief of this election, because I know there have been issues that staff have pointed out, and I'm glad to see that there's recommendations here to try to improve the system as best as possible. And I know it's always challenging to do this, and it's pretty hard, but you do an excellent job. on this. I have a couple of questions in regard to this, and maybe just to mention that I've been involved with Elections Ontario in terms of the preparation of the voters list and updating it as my role back over the last 3 elections. And when we do this, we try to update the provincial one. I'm going to speak on that basis because that's what I've been working for, and to make sure that all the information there is all updated and would be shared in the end. That's the way I understand it from what we've been educated. But I guess the bureaucracy at the top have maybe a different agenda, or there's legislation that withholds that. Is that the problem that you've had in getting any information from Elections Ontario or Canada? Because I know when we had the provincial election in June, municipal elections like 4 or 5 months later, I thought, geez, but we update all this stuff, you guys can have it. Does it fall through the cracks, or what's the problem?
The legislation requires that MPAC provide us with the preliminary list of electors, or the voters list. And the information that MPAC is working with is very much different than the information that may be available at the federal or the provincial levels. Thus, this is where we're seeing a breakdown in terms of the accuracy and completeness of the voters list.
Well, when we did with Elections Ontario, we didn't pass anything on to MPAC that I'm aware of. They somehow had their own list, and that's the list that they were dealing with. And I know the municipalities rely on MPAC, who seems to not be totally accurate. So I'm not sure between those two bodies whether they're not communicating or not. Have you noticed that, or?
MPAC does not get its information from the provincial electors list. It is getting its information from the assessment roll, and that's where the breakdown in the information is taking place. So yes, it is a frustration for voters, hence why AMCTO and other bodies are actively working with MPAC and advocating on behalf of electors to try and get some kind of mechanism in place that will improve the accuracy of the voters list.
Well, I appreciate that that's the objective, and I know the recommendation here in the report is to consultations and try to work and make things better, because it's for the benefit of everybody. That's what it really comes down to make things easier. Do we use MPAC assessment info, but we also have utilities, gas and water, and we bill these people on a monthly basis. I mean, that's up to date. Do we use that information as well as a secondary source?
There seems to be some question at this moment in time whether or not the personal information that we have within other databases that City has can be used, which is why one of the recommendations that I have in my report is to investigate whether or not we can utilize other information that is already within our possession, whether that can be used for another purpose, such as the voters list, other than what we had originally collected it for. So that's a little bit of an investigation and research that needs to happen. But also, too, I want to be cognizant of the fact that we know that the province is looking at this, or at least is going to be, AMCTO and other organizations will be advocating that some sort of changes happen to the whole entire enumeration process. So I want to make sure that whatever efforts we put forward are not going to be at cross purposes with whatever the province or others are trying to do with respect to the voters list, or that they're not going to be redundant.
When the election is finished, thanks for that answer. When the election is over, do you do a follow-up in terms of updating the information? And as an example, what we did with Elections Ontario is once the voters list is done, we get a number of people that had not been registered, they had just moved into the area or whatever, and they get updated. And then all that information came back to me, and we had a week or so to input all the updates, corrections, and changes so that it'd be ready for the next election. Does the city do a follow-up like that shortly thereafter?
Absolutely. All of the amendments to the voters list, all of those forms that were filled out prior to the election and during the election day, all the information has been inputted into our software database called VoterView, and we've also uploaded all that information to MPAC as well. So they are now in possession of all of the information that we have. So yes, we've put all that information into a database, and MPAC now has it as well.
Okay.
Good.
With respect, Councillor Yaneski, your time has expired.
Okay,
I
thanks.
would point out actually a couple of your questions actually are in the report. If I could, we still have 7 or 8 people in the queue. So I'm hoping if the information is in the report, then you shouldn't be asking the same questions, okay? Councillor Schneider.
First of all, thank you for this report. I can only imagine how much time and energy and effort went into it. It's very thorough, and your commitment to continuous improvement and excellence is admirable. Just one question I had on page 512 of the voting process. You talk about improvements for 2018 using the analysis of internet voting completed for the 2014 election to identify if circumstances have changed sufficiently enough to warrant potential adoption for 2018. Just wondering if that information will be made available to council and the public.
Oh, most definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Christine. Christine, and we've already talked about this, in my ward, one of the highest voter turnouts has been at the Concordia Seniors Residence on Ottawa Street. I went there and talked to them. I think every candidate goes in there to talk to them because of that. Everyone expected, as in former years, a poll to be in that residence. Then suddenly there was no poll, and people were calling me and the mayor and everyone else trying to find out what had gone wrong. And a lot of them told me that they would not bother to vote. I believe they had to go to another poll location, and they were not willing to do that. Now, I understand that happened because this was not classified as an institution. What was it that changed when it had always been a location for a poll?
It is not my understanding that anything changed with respect to this particular location. We had an advanced poll there in 2010 because we were trying something new in 2010 to have voting locations in apartment buildings over a certain number of citizens living there. In 2014, we looked at that and we saw that the cost was not very fair and equitable with respect to having advanced polls across the city. So with respect to that particular polling location, it does not meet the definition of an institution under the Act, and because apartment buildings will not allow other people to come into the building to vote and use it as a voting location, we made the decision to move the voting location somewhere outside of the building, albeit somewhat closer to the building than perhaps, say, they're closer to the mall or wherever it is that they would be typically going for banking or doing their grocery shopping. I think the key for us for 2018 really will be making sure that we're sensitive to the fact that people may have some expectations around where voting locations may be. And we need to do a better job of communicating with people where we have made changes to voting locations. It's not just for that particular location. There were other folks who, because of the June election, had come to vote in a particular location there for the provincial election or had been used to voting someplace previously. So I think the key for us right there will be making sure that while we want to be fair and equitable to all of our electors to the extent that we are able, we need to do a better job of communicating where there might be changes in voting locations.
And that kind of leads me into my next question. The location of polls, when people are accustomed to voting and they are voting, they're making the effort to vote at a poll. Why do we insist on changing the locations of those polls? And why don't we use, along that line, the same poll locations as the provincial and federal people use?
And that's a really great question. And in my report, I gave a long list of criteria that we utilize when we're looking at trying to set up polling locations. In some cases, we couldn't use a polling location that previously we had used because it was not AODA compliant. The province is able to use locations that are not AODA compliant. We, however, must use AODA compliant polling locations. So that resulted in some changes for some locations. In other cases, when we looked at adjusting population densities and we were looking at our polling subdivisions in light of growth or development within a particular area, it meant that in some cases we had to move the voting subdivision line, which in some cases did affect the actual polling location for the people in that particular area. So those are a couple of reasons for why changes might have been made. We do, as much as possible, try to reuse the voting locations. We are sensitive to the fact that people do get used to voting in certain places, and we don't like to change those too often if we don't have to. So it's something that we definitely will be looking at, and also looking at, although the lines for the provincial ridings don't exactly line up in many cases with our polling subdivisions because we're ward-based, we will definitely take a look at that, and it is on my report that we will take a look at that, and if it's possible for us to reuse those, then we definitely will. I will say, though, that the locations that we did use, we tried to make sure that they are locations that are well known within the community, are within easy traveling distance, and so those are things that we tried to take into account as part of the criteria that we used for deciding on a voting location.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Ellington, your time has expired. Thank you. Councillor Marsh, I have you up next, but do you want to wait until the end? Because you brought, okay, very good. Sure, very good. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I have just on number 2 here for a question. When a person goes into the city website and they had a list of who's running, what did that show? Did it not show, did it show email addresses, or did?
Where email addresses were available, we included that contact information along with any phone numbers, the candidate's name, address, and then the office they were running for.
But you didn't show the websites if they had them?
We went to our Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing representative along with our city solicitor, and I don't want to blame anyone for a decision that we made, but we looked at that and we decided, with the advice that we had received, that it was not appropriate for us to link to websites or biographical information. It is, however, something that I would definitely be looking at for 2018 to see if there's any change or movement in the opinion of our colleagues at Municipal Affairs and Housing.
Yeah. Okay, good. My biggest issues that I ran into was the voters list and the voter notification list, and I gather they are basically supposed to be one and the same.
The voter notification cards are sent out based on the voters list.
Yeah, and you have a system that's set up to do that it's separate from the voters list?
No, what we did was we took the information that we were provided from MPACT and we uploaded it into our system called VoterView, and from there the voter notification cards were created.
Okay, so you have this voters view system. Is it running all the time?
We only just acquired it for the 2014 election.
Like, is it running now?
It is running now, but we are looking at whether or not we need to continue to have it running. I've been talking with our colleagues at MPACT, and there's some question as to whether or not it's valuable to keep it running all the time. So that's something that I'm waiting to see what happens with respect to some of these initiatives around the whole voters lists. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't want to be redundant with what we're doing. I don't also want to be at cross purposes with MPACT. So I want to see where we land with respect to that. In the meantime, however, we do continue to update the voters list, or voter view, based on our death registrations. So we are continuing to do that activity.
Well, I want to know, like, births and deaths and that. They used to be registered at the municipality. Is that still the case?
Deaths are registered with the municipality. Births are registered directly with the province.
So somehow are those supplied to MPAC, or? Are they supplied to your system here?
We updated our voter view list, our voter view system, and all that information was updated to MPACT.
I find that is the biggest problem, that people that have died are still on the list, and the other problem is with students. I don't know how you ever overcome that. Does impact lists include the owners and the tenants and all the residents of a property? Or?
Currently, MPACT's list only lists owners. So this is one of the deficiencies with the MPACT system in utilizing them as the enumerators for the voters list, because it does not include renters. It doesn't include any types of changes in households. So whether an adult child moves out or moves back with his or her parents, those types of changes are not currently captured by MPACT. So this is just one of many deficiencies with the list and a reason for that deficiency.
Okay, I hope with the AMCTO talking to them, those are basic things that should be on that list that I don't think would take that much time when it's being set up. Another issue that I did hear about was this concern with students, the safety of children, and the possibility of having the PD days. Where does that stand? Which makes a bit of sense to have students and teachers away from those facilities. That shouldn't be that difficult to do.
We did float that idea out there with the school boards, and most definitely it has its pros and cons. It has its difficulties. It's not. It's something that I think the province would need to advocate on behalf of municipalities. There definitely is a disconnect currently between the Safe Schools Act and the utilization of schools. But we definitely have floated the idea out there, and it's something that we have also raised with our colleagues at Municipal Affairs and Housing. We're not the only municipality who's brought that forward as a thought or an idea.
Okay. I didn't read very much about online voting. Where does that stand? Are we continuing to look at that, or?
So this particular report was a debrief report for the 2014 election. There is a commitment here for us to update the analysis of online voting for the 2018 election, and something will be likely coming forward to Council at some point in the future in advance of the 2018 election.
Okay, and in line with that, I know we hear from you just prior to the election, and we hear from you after the election. Is it possible, I would like to hear from you every year to see where we're progressing, because if we don't hear from you, sometimes it becomes too late to do anything. But how difficult would it be to brief Council annually as to where we stand, what's in the air, and where we're going? I'll leave that for your consideration, okay? I would like to see us look at it a little more often, because otherwise it's too late or too soon.
Most people don't like to see me too often.
No, notwithstanding that, I think it would be a good idea. The other question I have, I noticed that you didn't cut any corners, but your budget, you had a 20% favorable variance. Now, when we put money into that reserve this time, did we base it on what was put in last time, or based on what your results were for this election?
We typically take any surplus and we put it forward to the following election for the reserve. So it's whatever we've saved, we put forward. There is a possibility for 2018 that we would like to utilize a little bit more technology, and sometimes that costs a little bit more money. So I'm not exactly sure how that's all going to shake out for 2018, but we definitely will be looking at making sure that we are as budget conscious as we can be without cutting corners.
No, but I would hope.
Councillor Gazzoli, you're a fair bit over time. Are you want to ring back in, or is it a final question?
I'd sort of like to make a comment at some time.
Oh, we'll do comments afterwards. Mayor Vabenovich.
Thank you very much. I have, first of all, a great report by staff. You've obviously covered off a number of the areas that are that were relevant and that were addressed in the, I guess, during the election and post-election. A few questions, comments on the issue of AODA compliance and in terms of the space. I guess I'm just trying to understand how one set of rules can apply for the province and another set for us. Have we raised that with the ministry?
We have. It is a question that we ask as well. Part of it is around the fact that schools do not need to be AODA compliant until 2021, and we do use a fair number of schools for our polling locations. So part of it is around that, and part of it is that the province has a different deadline for themselves with respect to that. So it is something that we have raised as an issue.
But does the Municipal Act specifically say that every location must be AODA compliant?
It does.
Mr. Goody, to add?
Okay.
Through your chair, Davey, just to add to that, I know of some recent court cases with respect to federal and provincial polling locations, and they are now also going to be having to follow similar standards to ensure that they're fully accessible and AODA compliant. And those are just within this past year.
Well, and I understand that. I mean, I guess the question is, you know, particularly if we're moving towards allowing folks to, you know, go to a location of their choice to vote. I know we don't do that on election day, but as you become more computerized, then that should hopefully help us alleviate some of those issues in the future. I share with the concerns around the voter list, and I think in the coming months we need to be strong in our advocacy on that with both the province and MPAC, because quite frankly, I mean, the state of those lists is abysmal, and somehow there needs to be some sort of coordination with the province and feds and provide municipalities with access, at least as a foundation, to their lists. I know there are other people that get to vote on ours because of property ownership, which is different than just citizenship. But it would, if we could at least get a core list and then just deal with those discrepancies, I think that would go a long way towards dealing with our problems. This whole issue of polling subdivisions is one that I think needs to be revisited. We went to these larger polling subdivisions of 1,500, 2,000 voters per polling subdivision, and I think you need to look at it beyond the context of just what's perhaps easier from a staffing point of view. It also needs to be looked at in the context of what works and makes sense from a campaign organization point of view. And I think that's part of why, as you look at provincial and federal ones, they're kept at a reasonable size, because as you sort of look at what, you know, campaign volunteers can do within a, you know, 3 or 4 hour time frame and so on and so forth, that's part of the reason why things have been kept to 200, 250, 300 households at a time. And so when you start putting them into these 1,500, 2,000 household units, it actually really makes it very difficult to manage that. So I would really encourage us to look back at that, and I was glad to hear that you're going to look at how this could line up with the provincial and federal ones again. And I think if we do that, it should also, over the long term, hopefully minimize workload for staff. The final point was just on the advertising issue, and it's really not touched on in here. I think one of the things we need to do through AMO and, you know, through the ministry, we do this coordinated approach to advertising in the region. That really needs to happen provincially. I mean, I think part of the reason you see more advertising happening more people voting in provincial and federal campaigns is you see Elections Ontario and Elections Canada doing mass advertising campaigns. And if Elections Ontario did the same thing on behalf of municipalities and did the radio and TV, which otherwise don't make a whole lot of sense or are unaffordable for the municipality or even a group of municipalities on our own, if it was done on a province-wide basis, And then you can always insert, the little, in Kitchener, call the clerk's office, 741, whatever, 2278 or whatever the number is. I think that would help address some of those things. So I would hope that we can still pursue that and look at that in the coming 4 years as part of this.
Okay, your time has expired, Mr. Mayor, but Mr. Goodeve to comment.
Yes, Mr. Goodeve may want to jump in here as well, but just on the point regarding the voting subdivisions, I just wanted to say that the numbers that we utilize are the standard best practice numbers that most municipalities use in a municipality of our size. We try to balance that out with respect to the number of available locations within a particular area, and in keeping in mind with all of that is, the travel time as well. So I hear what you're saying. We are trying to balance that out, but we definitely will be looking at our polling subdivisions for 2018 and seeing what, if anything, we can be doing. But that list of criteria that I've included in my report does its best to try and balance out all of those various aspects when we're looking at them. I don't know if Mr. Goodeve has something else to add.
Mr. Goodeve?
Through you, Chair Davey. It also goes to the setup of the polling station itself. For federal and provincial elections, they have their voting subdivisions, and each voting subdivision is then broken down into individual wards. So they would take a voting subdivision of, say, 2,500 and then break it down to 300 elector increments. And they would have a DRO and a poll clerk stationed beside each other, and they would just have a list specific to that one poll. When we broke our list down in our configuration of our voting locations, our entire voting subdivision is considered one poll. And what we've done is we basically given the entire list. We saw that voters couldn't really, in 2010 when we first implemented this, we knew voters didn't really associate themselves with a number like 3-15 or 5-40, but they didn't know, the alphabet, their last name. So what we did was we'd broken it up by alpha instead, so then people just have to go and look for, when they walk in, their last name A, B. We took it one step further in 2014 where we basically had one list across all of our poll clerks and our ballot clerks, and so any member of the public coming in could go and line up in front of any one of the ballot clerks. So under the provincial or federal elections, they're confined to just going to those specific two people. We're here, most voting places, we're giving them 3-4 people that they can go get their names crossed off to hopefully add efficiencies out of the polls. So it's slightly to do with how our voting places are set up and staffed as well. That is the reason for the capacity difference.
Very good. Councillor Singh.
Yes, just want to thank staff for a very comprehensive report which outlines a good breadth of improvements that will be looked at into the future election, as well as all your commitment and efforts for this last election for you, Ms. Tarling and Goodeves and the rest of staff as well. My question was related to number 2, and I had a question for number 3 as well on the amendment. So speaking to potential of allowing municipal candidates to include their website and biographical information. So you've answered part of that. My issue was I've heard of, and we had tried to encourage this when this came from a recommendation from the Compass Kitchener Committee. So it will be looked at further, I'm guessing. As to biographical information, does that open up something even further of an aspect of difficulty beyond just having a website alone listed on the candidates information section, or would that comprise of the same type of issues with the website?
We looked at it as being part and parcel of the same issue, so it definitely would be something, again, as I mentioned earlier, we would look at and see, based on advice from Municipal Affairs and Housing, whether or not we could go a little bit further into that particular territory. So
Okay.
it's something that we will be looking at.
Is the issue still equitability, the fact that some may not have a website and some may, or?
No, what it has to do with is, under the Act, is whether or not we are providing a service to the particular candidate. And so the whole issue turns on that particular clause within the Act itself and what constitutes a service.
That it's almost a form of campaigning on the site.
Correct.
Okay. If there's campaigning relevant literature associated to it. Okay, that was my question. For number 3, I remember in the past that this council had approved a motion for some sort of statement to go back to the province in looking at this. What happened with that? Did we get any communication back, or?
I have not received anything back. This is a province-wide issue. I don't know at this point where the province is in looking at this particular issue. We can continue to, make sure that the issue is raised with MMAH. And certainly council can do the same as well. But at this point, I haven't heard anything back whether any decisions have been made regarding where they're going with that.
Okay, how can we lobby further? What more can we do on our part? We can't take any independent steps, obviously.
No, you cannot. I mean, you can always send a motion forward to the province, raising your issues or your concerns with respect to that, or if you have a particular direction you'd like the province to go in. So the will of council could certainly take that forward, and we would send a letter to the province with respect to that. You could advocate and lobby via some of your other municipal colleagues and try and put something forward to the province in that regard as well.
Perfect. Okay, good. That's some good recommendations. And finally, this was touched on by the mayor's comments as well. Personally, I had some issues with the voters list as well, but it pales in comparison to looking at what the voter turnout was, and I think that's where foremost my frustration lies, in hoping that we could endeavor to work towards ensuring that there's more participation by our citizens to, take part in the election process. Now, aspect of advertising is one. Will there be strategies looked at how we can communicate with our citizens well in advance of the election, communicating, of course, the dates, but as well as the importance of the election, importance of local municipal government, key aspects of municipal government does. And I think that's where the disengagement really happens when it comes to the provincial and federal elections. People just sometimes have a little more awareness. Obviously, media helps with that quite a bit. But beyond that, there's still a little bit of indifference because lack of understanding exactly of what the municipality does, core services. Will that be looked at as well?
We always endeavor to make sure that more information is getting out to our citizens with respect to all the services that the municipality provides and the value of those services. I think that in general, all of the engagement activities that the city is taking part in for a variety of different initiatives and projects will serve over time to facilitate and raise the awareness of citizens with respect to the importance of the services that municipalities do provide to them. So I think that in conjunction with elevating some of our communication efforts regarding the election, I hope over time will serve to engage and encourage our citizens to come out and actually vote. But the candidates also play a part in that as well. And I know that you folks work very hard to try and raise people's awareness as well. So I think when we put all those efforts together, I hope at least that will engage our citizens more and encourage them to come out and vote.
Yeah, just a quick point. I think we own some responsibility of that as well as a local government, and I think that can be easily done with different aspects of communication that we do with the residents, simply with their tax, statements that get sent out. Just a better breakdown. I think we will be able to do that with the upgrades to our revenue tools, but I hope that that's the direction that we're heading towards.
Okay. Councillor Singh, your time's expired, so. There are still six people in the queue now, including those that want to speak a second time. So I'd ask that you try and keep your comments briefer. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, through you, Chair Davey. First of all, I just want to commend staff on a fabulous job that they do with this election. I think a lot of people don't realize the amount of work that is needed to undertake here to pull off an election. So I mean, first of all, fabulous job. One of the concerns that I did have, and a lot of the concerns were kind of echoed already from some of our members here on committee. But one concern that was brought to my attention on a few occasions during the election campaign, and one was candidates that were doing campaigning on city property, and it happened more than once. And And what are the municipal act, and what is your role on how we can alleviate this? Because the world I come from, I call that cheating. So I would like to see what we can do to alleviate that.
So in terms of my role, as issues are brought to my attention, my role is to contact the individual, make them aware if they weren't already of their obligations under whatever policy we have or whatever the Municipal Elections Act says. It becomes a little bit complicated in terms of I have to ensure that whilst I'm doing all of that, I'm remaining neutral. So I think I want to make sure that people clearly understand what the policy is, and we just monitor the situation. I'm pleased to say that anytime anything was brought to somebody's attention, they were very good at making sure that they rectified it as quickly as possible. And so I think really what needs to happen is there needs to be really an open line of communication between myself as the clerk, as somebody who can assist people in making sure they understand what the rules are, and then the candidates making sure that that they follow those rules.
Okay, so what happens if they don't follow the rules?
Well, the Municipal Elections Act is pretty prescriptive with respect to when penalties and fines will be imparted. Most of it has to do with financial issues or issues to do with corrupt practices. So with respect to signage, etc., there isn't a lot of leverage with respect to that. We just hope that people will respect the policy, and if and when that isn't being respected, then we will go out in the case of a sign, for example, and we will ask bylaw to go forward and take those signs down.
Okay, I wasn't too concerned about the signs as much as more as on city property, and it happened several times, and I would like to see some more teeth into that, and because it's not fair to other candidates or any candidate than when there's someone that's campaigning on a city property, and I'm just wondering what we can do to have more teeth of that, because that to me is it's a big concern, and I'm almost thinking whether or not we can put another part of the amendment to that. We can look at lobbying the province for an amendment there to at least give some kind of form of, some teeth to that legislation.
Certainly, if you're looking for there to be more teeth, it really would have to come through the Municipal Elections Act itself, and so that would be something that you could potentially lobby the province for with respect to that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
I just walked in. I don't know where the discussions have gone, so forgive me if I had to take Tyson to a hearing test, by the way. He passed, so we're all good. Hey. So I was not watching backstage or back in the other room, so I don't know what's happened. Are we on comments? Or
we're still in questions? Yeah.
Still in questions. I know that the report addressed one of the concerns that I had. The report addresses most of the concerns that came up with regards to the ward that I represent. But the one is with regards to the institutions, and I understand that there's regulations around that. But when there's a partnering building that is under the same ownership or the same well, it's the same ownership, same company. Is there a possibility at looking at running a site jointly, whether it be in the institutional part or in the other portion of the building? Is that something we can look at for next?
Yes, it is actually something that I did address in the report. We based our polling subdivisions and the voting locations on address. And in the cases where we separated out an institution, it was because the addresses actually were different. So what we would need to do is we would need to have a conversation with the institutions to find out what, in their minds, constitutes residence, because under the Act, only residents of that institution may vote at that institution. So although I may not have said it quite clearly, it's fortunate it was clear in my mind. So we do want to talk with the institutions to understand what exactly comprises their complex. So while they may have a long-term care facility at one address and perhaps townhouses for independent living at a separate address, do they consider that to be part of their complex, part of their institution, and therefore the folks who are in the townhouses, for example, are they considered to be quote-unquote residents of the institution? So we will definitely be working with our institutions more closely going into 2018 to ensure we fully understand what comprises that complex and then who can then vote at that institution. Right.
And before you continue, Councillor Galvez, I just wanted to clarify in my opening statements too, there's a recommendation here, but it's also sort of for discussion. So if you want to mix in comments, that's kind of the idea. So I just want to let you know before you. Okay, go ahead.
Just to take that a step further, if it's determined that they're not considered residents, is it a possibility? I know in here you talked about having some polling stations only for so long in different locations that you may be able to have, half the day or a couple hours in the institution and then a couple hours next door. I'm sure there's more than just the one that I'm referencing in Ward 5, but throughout the city.
We definitely have the flexibility that we could do that. We're not bound by the Act to restrict where we can put a polling location. So if that winds up being the case, then certainly we could take a look at that.
Okay. I actually was going to, I didn't have it written out, but bring something forward similar to the last clause there on the proposed motion with respect to voter turnout, that the ongoing efforts, but that there actually be a report that is brought back that can look at, we did have a voter turnout committee a number of years back. I sat on it in my first term, and I think it needs to be re-looked at. I don't think it was something that was followed through on as well as it could have been. So if we can, I would just like to see a report brought back to see if a voter turnout committee would help to engage some more of the community and really try and address this issue and see if there's opportunities that we're missing in trying to get different demographics out to the polls. So I don't know if that's an amendment to the current or the motion that's on the screen in front of us. Again, not having been here and understanding the full process. And then just quickly, I'm sure we've touched on parking at schools. I know it's touched on in the report, and that just needs to continue to be addressed because there's in Ward 5 was really only school locations that were used, and parking was a significant issue during school hours. And so something needs to be addressed there, whether it's they kindly ask staff to park somewhere else and we give them passes so that they can park on a street that maybe is typically a no parking street, or look at options that we can address that. I think that's important moving forward. And I just wanted to say there was a great response from staff on the day of the election to address concerns and take immediate action on matters that they could assist and address. And so I think that was all my concerns because the rest of them were addressed in the report.
Okay, thank you. I'll jump in for a moment myself. I just want to echo that there's a tremendous amount of work to get through an election. The 52 items cover practically every one of the concerns that I had. My only question really is with respect to actually voter turnout as well. And I do think that one of the big solutions, if the PD day does or does not work out, this idea of the advanced poll occurring on a Saturday, which has happened. But so I guess my question is, supposing that we strike out with the province in terms of getting the PD day, et cetera, is there anything from really preventing us from focusing, really putting all of our advertising eggs in one basket for one Saturday before the election as the advanced poll? Because I think that might be an approach that really helps voter turnout, because if there's one thing I've heard from residents and friends even is, Monday they go to work, they come home, there's a million things to do, kids are in school, et cetera, and it doesn't fit in. But then a lot of times they're not aware that there was an advanced poll because we're advertising a lot of them. So is it a possibility for us, I'm assuming it wouldn't circumvent the act and the provinces choosing the day, et cetera, for us to really focus a bunch of our advertising on a single Saturday ahead of time?
So I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand your question. Sure. Are you suggesting that we scale back from 4 days of advanced poll and focus on one large advanced poll day?
Not necessarily, but more so focusing the advertising on one big day, one big Saturday, one big weekend day before the actual voting day. Is that and again, I'm just looking if this is just providing input. I think that's within council's role to ask, but.
We have the flexibility to establish when and the times for advanced polls. I take your point that advertising for the advanced polls, we probably should increase our effort with regard to all of that. I'm hesitating only because we like to provide multiple advanced poll days because there may be people who aren't available on a particular Saturday, and we wouldn't want to disenfranchise those folks. So when we offer our advanced polls, we try to do so with the idea in mind that we're going to accommodate people with differing schedules, etc. So I think most definitely every election, we always look at the advanced polls. We most definitely could look at our communication efforts around those advanced polls. I think if we get our voter notification cards out earlier, those are advertised, the advanced polls are advertised on those voter notification cards as well. So I think there are a number of different things that we can do to try and encourage people to come out on all of the voting days that we offer, but just one time to come out, not coming out multiple times.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I don't know, I seem to think if people had there's one key date, like I'm thinking of a radio ad where you're trying to get out 4 different or whatever, however many different advanced polling dates, people driving their car will hear none of them, but if the focus was on one specific big voting Saturday, or for other dates, go visit our website, et cetera, I'm just thinking that might end up helping with voter turnout, but I'm happy to hear some other comments. I think that was, the only other thing that I would add is there's been, I don't want to get into it now, but there's been a lot of some discussion about online voting. I recall that report very well, and I think that it's very little has changed in terms of what that brings to the table and what it does not. So I would suggest that instead of looking at it again from a different lens, that we recirculate that report. The only thing that might have changed is the absolute cost in implementing that. But I will just say very briefly that I was one of those people that was hugely in favor of internet voting until I got the report, and now I'm not a fan. Anyway, so we'll go back around. There are 4 people in the queue. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. So I want to just ask, if anyone voting at any polling station during the advanced polls worked really well, which I understand it did, then I would like to know why we would not want to implement that for voting day. It was referenced briefly by Mayor Verbanovic, but I just want to ask outright.
So we actually did talk about that. We have lots of ideas that we float out there, and there are challenges for doing that, not the least of which is that it would be extremely unpredictable as to how many people actually might show up at a polling location if we didn't have people sort of divided out. So one of the risks that we run with regards to that is that we could have huge lineups at a particular location that everybody happened to favor, and then no one or very few people showing up at another polling location. So I wouldn't want to exacerbate the concept or the idea of the lack of parking that we've already heard about as an issue, or having long lineups. So when we devise our polling subdivisions, we do so with the idea in mind of trying to equalize as much as possible across the city, and that we're not straining any one particular location. I suppose if we went to a larger location to try and help to accommodate all of those folks, then we run the risk of having fewer locations and increasing people's travel time. So those are just a few of the issues. The other aspect of it too is on a technical level. When we had our advanced polls, we were running an electronic voters list and we were all tied into the same network. If we move out to the schools and other locations that we don't control and that we're not tapped into regarding their network, then we have difficulties with respect to the to tracking voters. So we wouldn't want somebody to go to one voting location and then show up somewhere else down the road. So we would have to have the voters list being kept up to date on a real-time basis. And there's a huge challenge doing that in locations where we don't control the network and we're not tapped into that particular network. So those are just a couple of some of the risks and obstacles that we face with regard to going in that direction.
Okay, Mr. Goody, to add?
Through your Chair, Davey, just also build on that. There's another obstacle in terms of resources. Currently, we have 5 different ballot types. The voters list that gives us our current breakdown identifies roughly where each of those identified school supports happen to be located, so we know if there's a large concentration of, say, French school voters. And for those voting places, we would supply extra French school ballots. Given the cost for ballots, it won't be feasible to have the number of ballots needed at every location in case those different voters happen to show up at a different location or another specific location. It would dramatically increase the cost of producing the ballots.
For French school voters in particular, or other considerations?
I believe right now we probably have, I'd say, twice to almost 3 times as many English public voters in the city than we do, say, to English separate. But because the English separate could go to any voting location, we would need to have an equal number of English separate voter ballots available at each and every voting location. Where right now we can be a little more strategic with the supplies, knowing where we have concentrations of certain types of voters and according to the voters list.
I fully appreciate all of the complications that having voting at any polling station would create, but I would put back to you that even though you make some extremely valid points, I think that they are overcomable. And with regard to French school ballots, perhaps that would be something that we would have to direct people to a couple of the polling stations that they currently would otherwise use. But we had some cases, in particular in my ward, and I'm guessing in other wards too, where people's voting places were so far in terms of walkability, and there were other polling stations that were closer to them that they weren't allowed to vote at. And I would like to see that rectified. I appreciate that you have brought this in under budget considerably, and I would always want to applaud staff for bringing something in under budget. However, I think that when we balance the need to make sure that we increase voter turnout with the need to be fiscally responsible, I think that we need to make sure that we utilize the budget to its fullest potential when it comes to voter turnouts, which is habitually low. It's always low. So that is a priority over budget in my mind in this case.
We take your point, and as I mentioned in the report, we always look at our polling subdivisions. We always look at different ideas, and then as staff, we try to see whether those barriers are overcomable, and try to take it on balance. Whether or not if we're going to produce a good value on one side, or are we going to create a huge deficiency on another side? So that is part and parcel of everything. We don't just automatically do one election to the next, to the next, to the next. We're constantly looking at everything to see what did we do last time and how can we improve for 2018. So most definitely would be part of what we would do in that realm.
Okay, thank you. I'm out of time, right?
Correct, yes. Thank you. Councillor Yaneski.
I do appreciate that the city is ahead of the province, Elections Ontario, by using tabulators in terms of all our calculations and processing. The province is still back on the old pencil and counted by hand, and that's unfortunate. But that's just a comment that you guys are doing a great job on that. On the advanced poll issue that Councillor Davey brought up, is there a minimum number of days that you need to have from the advanced polls to the election polls to update all your records so that this way come election time, you have voters that are not voting twice to try to get around the system?
So in the past, it always has been extremely challenging to make sure, because when we were utilizing paper lists, we had to make sure that they were updated every day so that somebody couldn't go from one day to the next to a different voting location. When we went to the electronic voters list this time, we were we were updating our voters list in real time as we were moving forward. But when we do need some time in between the last advance poll day and election day to actually produce our hard copy voters list, because we were utilizing a hybrid system and we were utilizing locations where we couldn't do real-time voter list updating. So in that particular instance, we did need a little bit of time in between the last advance poll day and the election day to get our voters list up to date, printed, and then deployed out to all of the different voting locations.
Okay, and I appreciate that, because we had the same issues with Elections Ontario, trying to make sure it was done correctly. The other question I have in regards to the recommendation here, an amendment on number 3, talking about permanent residents, how are you going to able to monitor that? Because I know we had a challenge as Elections Ontario to know whether you're a Canadian citizen or not, but how are you going to be able to identify whether a person is a permanent resident or not a permanent resident? Just by word of mouth, or how's that going to all work?
Through you, Chair Davey. Similar to current situations, there's no requirement for people to show like a passport or any kind of any similar documentation at polls. If there is any question in accordance, if we're looking at the list, and there's any question in terms of citizenship, a person can take an oath of citizenship, and so that they solemnly affirm that they are a Canadian citizen, and that satisfies the requirement. Taking such oaths carries similar weight and effect as swearing an oath in court, and so if it was found that they were committing fraud, then they could be brought up on charges as well in accordance with the Act.
And I can understand that answer, because that's the challenge we had, is to identify Canadian citizens, and you just walk up and vote without being challenged, especially at the different polling stations. And you may not even be a Canadian citizen, so how would you be able to identify whether you're not a permanent resident? And I agree with you that oath is an option or a way of trying to circumvent and address the issue, but it's no guarantee at all. So that's a concern that we had, and I was just trying to figure out how that would be addressed municipally.
We can only accept the ID that is regulated by the province, so we rely on the list that the province provides us with as legal identification, and then we do, as Mr. Goodeve has said, with respect to the oath. So there is some responsibility on behalf of the individual as well.
What was the last part?
There is some responsibility on behalf of the individual as well, not to commit fraud.
And that's a concern we always had too, and that was a big problem. Thank you.
Councillor Etherington?
Just some comments, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Right now?
Yeah, that's fine.
Just quickly, appreciating the delay to this review is not the problem of the clerk and staff. I'm concerned to see this item up for review at least 6 months after the election, and I think a better time to do this would be perhaps a month after, when we as councillors or former candidates remember the problems that surfaced. You tend to forget in between time. In Ward 9, during the election, I watched numerous times where potential voters were discouraged, not encouraged, from voting. We, now, when I say we, I appreciate it's not just our clerk's department, it's the province, it's entrenched. We moved established polls. We didn't deliver voting notification cards. We left people, dozens of people in my ward, off the voters list. And we poorly communicated poll locations, to mention just a few of the shortcomings that I ran into. I think we have to do better in order to change our truly pathetic voter turnout. And if that involves more money and a higher budget for our clerk's department, I think we should be willing to invest more money in order to improve our election and up that voter turnout. In the past, I've noted and made the comment that we tend to spend more on our annual Humane Society contract than we do on the municipal election. I think that's out of whack, and I think we need to do something about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments that I would like to make.
Please.
My concern goes back to the voters list. I think everything originates with the voters list and the problems we're having there. If we have a good, up-to-date voters list, it results in good voter notification cards, and with that, a lot of these issues that we're having, I think, could disappear. If people are informed soon enough with a good card, they're on the list. It tells them where they vote. It tells them where if they can't make it, when the advanced polls are, and all that. There's so much information there that that's really causing us a lot of problems. People have been left off the list, and by the time they're aware of it, sometimes I think it's election day before they really become aware of it. So it really all hinges in on that voters list. I can't believe with today's technology that we don't have one up-to-date list for the entire country to handle everything. I can't understand why we don't have something like that could deal with all the issues, provincial, federal, municipal elections. And I would like we belong to several organizations, and I think we need to push to get this voters list problem corrected. We belong to FCM and AMO and AMCTO. I would like to see us in the upcoming years to be pushing to correct the voters list problem. I really feel that so many things hinge on the problems we have there. I also hope that we're going to look at this on an annual basis, not just, as I mentioned before now, do I need an amendment to be put on here that we review where we stand with the election annually? If I do, I will...
I'm going to pause your time for a second here. Anyway, I was actually going to bring that up because yourself and Councillor Galloway-Selak also was hoping that a report would come back. So in the interest of trying, we're a fair bit over time here. I just looked to staff if they're, without going into amendments, if we can look for a report coming back. I'm looking for direction from... Oh, you have it written? Okay. Councillor Gazzola, if you would like to hold, Councillor Galloway-Selak does have her amendment written. Okay.
I don't care where it comes from. That's fine.
Okay.
The next point I just want to deal. I do hope that we do review the online voting again for the future. Again, with the technology that we have today, I think it's appropriate that we start to look in that direction. I feel that there are so many ways that online voting is used in running private corporations that it can be used at this level. I would like to see us look into this. Anyone votes anywhere. I really think that would be, if we can improve our technology on the voters list and all of that, I think that can work. And perhaps, I know there are a lot of problems, but there are a lot of solutions too. We tend to look at the problems too closely and let the problems build up, but there are solutions. You know, at least in each ward to have one location where anyone could vote at. If they miss where they would normally vote, they would have an opportunity to go to that one location. The final thing I want to speak about is just, it is a problem, and I don't know the answer, and I don't know if how we ever deal with it, but I found in talking to a lot of people they really get concerned with the large ballot at the municipal level. When you vote federally, when you vote provincially, you're dealing with 4, 5, half a dozen people. When you're voting at the local level, you have so many, you have a ward councillor, you have mayor, you have regional chair, you have regional representative. Then you go to the school board, and that overwhelms people. And if we ever got to the point where you could vote online, you know, and you have these voting systems where you could vote and you don't submit it. You can do so much of it, and then you can come back to it. And with such a large ballot, I think we need to look at issues like that, because when you talk about voter turnout, I know that scares a lot of people off. I know, and they have a feeling that you have to vote for everything. You have to fill in every slot, and because of that, sometimes they say, "What's the use? I'm not going near the place." So that's it. But the big issue is the voters list. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And quickly, just want to speak to the importance of us doing everything that we can to increase the voters' turnout. And of course, different technologies need to be looked at, as well as our effort to communicate the importance and the dates, the relevant dates of the election date, and the necessary funds that will be required. I think would be money well spent. Especially when we focus on increasing the civics participation. The later point, I want to talk to the amendment with Councillor Sarah Marsh for Part 3, potential to allow permanent residents to vote. Just want to quickly say that every member, a resident in Kitchener, regardless of their citizenship status, is a very important fabric of this community, and we need to ensure that if whatever steps can be taken to allow to have their voices included in the governance, and I'd like to again express my opinion that local government is very different than provincial and federal government. Our services, the services that we provide, our function is very different, and I think it speaks to inclusivity of participation of all members of a community, and the importance of that needs to be paramount. Even on a personal note, my mom, she's just recently got her citizenship, and one of the problems of her delaying it was aspects of her fluency in English isn't as proficient, and she waited longer because that's part of the requirement now for attaining citizenship, that you have to have a certain level of fluency in English. So the steps to citizenship has gotten difficult and longer, rightly so, and the importance of for us to aspire to be able to become citizens is very much so. But at least at the local level, we need to ensure, as I said earlier, all voices, all members need to be included in the future decisions of what the city is going to be and what direction it will go. And I hope that further steps will be taken for us to lobby with the province to ensure that we take the necessary steps.
Thank you. Councillor Galway-Selak.
Yeah, I'm just looking forward to bring forward the motion that I've written out. I added in the portion that Councillor Gazzola referenced. I can give it to the clerk. I probably should read it first, though.
Please.
Just that staff bring back a report with respect to ways to increase voter turnout, which would specifically look at the potential of bringing back the voter turnout committee, which I just think is a little bit more direction with regards to the last paragraph that's already on here. And then the second part of that, and that a progress report regarding the election be brought back annually. And that was the point that Councillor Gazzola. And I think those are just more specific to some of the direction that's in the motion in front of us here. And it's a little bit more specific. And I think if we do end up moving forward with the voter turnout committee, some of those pieces, the 1, 2, and 3, that the committee could actually do some of that advocacy work with regards to strengthening some of those areas as well. So that would be my, I guess it would be an amendment or a separate motion, however you want to take it, but I have it written out.
Yeah, sure. We'll take it as a separate amendment.
And it's,
so to clarify then, the intention would be for staff to report back in May sometime next year then, if it's going to be annual?
With regards to the first portion, I would suggest, with regard to the voter turnout, I would say before May, but then the annual report in the second paragraph probably could come back within a year's time.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Okay, so staff comment, yes. Ms. Darling?
I would suggest that rather than us bringing a report back on an annual basis, I understand where you're going, Councillor Galloway-Sealog. I'm just wondering if it would be more appropriate for us to be bringing back reports when work has actually been completed on a particular initiative or item regarding the election. It may well be that depending on the cycle of things that we may not have anything to bring back on an annual basis, but that we may have things to bring back at a time that's more appropriate with respect to a particular item or initiative.
I would say probably either or. If there's something that comes up that is significant and you want to bring that report forward, I wouldn't say that this motion would preclude you from doing that on the offset. But I think if I heard, because that piece is more put in from Councillor Gazzola's perspective, so he can speak to it as well. But I see it as being, even if there isn't much to report, just bring that back and basically say that, you know, we're still working on this piece, and this piece, so it doesn't necessarily need to be a discussion item or a recommendation or anything like that. Just this is where we're at, you know, and in these early years it may not be substantial, but I think my understanding from what Councillor Gazzola was saying, it's just to keep us in the loop, keep it on the forefront, and if things are coming up, then we can help address those moving forward. But I can let him speak to it further if he wishes.
Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, that's it exactly. I would like to hear from you at least once a year. Here's what's happening. Here's what's coming forward in the next year, and at least it sort of notifies all members of council of where we're going, and perhaps they can say, well, I think we should hear about that sooner or later or what have you. So, I mean, the annual report doesn't have to be a lengthy issue. It's just something to sort of update us as to where we're going.
I don't see a big issue in me doing that as long as council's expectation is that there may be some times where there wouldn't be much to report, and also that council remains cognizant of the statutory responsibilities that I have under the Municipal Elections Act.
Okay, with that in mind, if at committee's discretion, then this is what's before us isn't exactly, I don't think, what we're intending. So this will be ratified at council. So we'll do some wordsmithing in terms of, if I'm understanding correctly, I'm looking for nods, that staff come back when they have something to report, ideally annually, but there may be an 18th month, there may be an 18-month span between when they come back, but provided that they have something actually to report. Is that the understanding that I'm getting, Councillor Gazzola?
It's amazing the things that I ask that are so complicated.
Okay.
I said it's amazing that things are... No, what I actually asked is once a year we're brought up to date as to where do we stand on our election issue. It's a thing that's with us all the time. Surely to God, once a year we can devote 15 minutes to it.
If we have ever voted just 15 minutes to something, that would be fantastic. Mr. Chapman.
Through the chair, if you'd prefer, we can bring it back next week. I guess, on behalf of the clerk, my question would be, fundamentally, what is the purpose of that annual report? I heard Councillor Gazzola say that oftentimes things are left too late, and by the time the information comes forward, it's too late to make a decision. I believe that was with reference to electronic voting in particular. And I would remind Council that the report that you saw in the last term was brought to you with sufficient lead time that if it was to be implemented, it could have been implemented. All I would remind Council is there are really only two decisions that Council ever has with respect to the election. One is what budget to set for the election, which is why that issue came before you in the last term. And the other is around the timing and location of advanced polls. Apart from that, there is no other decision for Council to make. And my concern would be that, apart from those two issues, if the reports are coming forward annually, it would really provide an opportunity or license for Council to seek to give direction in areas that are really beyond the statutory authority of Council in this area. So on the point of budget, we agree wholeheartedly. If things need to come to inform a budget decision, like something like electronic voting, we will bring that in sufficient time for council to make that decision. But I would express some concern about bringing an annual report forward because I believe it would provide a platform for council to wade into an issue that really resides with the statutory authority of the clerk.
Okay, in fairness, Councillor Gazzola, to speak before we move along. Thoughts? Councillor Gazzola.
The whole thing is here, yes, we don't have authority to do, I go back to the voters list, which I see is causing so many of our problems. These are things that we cannot do, but we have to move other people to cooperate with us to deal with it. We have the FCM, we have AMO, we have AMCTO, who I understand are now working on this. I would like to be briefly brought up to date. What's happening and what can we do?
Mr. Chapman.
And with respect to our advocacy efforts, I think that's entirely appropriate. And I would say also with respect to the voter turnout committee, as you know, that was work that was led in large part outside of the clerk's office. And so, again, it may be appropriate to report back on that. I think, and perhaps it wasn't clear in the motion, but if the intention is to report back on things like voting subdivisions, voting locations, those sorts of things, it really provides an opportunity for council to seek to give direction in areas that council is not permitted under statute to give direction. So with that clarification, I believe we'd be happy to report back on those two issues in particular.
Okay, Councillor Galway-Seelock.
I think that's what my intent would have been, is just some of those advocacy efforts. And if there's anything significant that, staff is working on with regards to whether it be a change or just, the progress of communication or how they've engaged the community and trying to increase, those pieces, not necessarily anything to do with the legislative responsibility. I think it just keeps it in the forefront of our mind, and it gives us an opportunity to continue to try and work on voter turnout, to have it, publicly discussed or looked at with a report annually. But yeah, I see it more being with regards to the advocacy efforts, which are outlined in the motion that Councillor Marsh brought forward, as well as the voter turnout committee or anything that we are doing to increase voter turnout.
Okay. 2 comments, and then we'll vote on this. Councillor Marsh.
Just quickly to mention that also I'm not familiar with Compass Kitchener's work plan this term, but perhaps we should check in with them. I understand that they usually have a voter turnout subcommittee that would look at this issue as well, so we could dovetail with their efforts. Staff could dovetail with their efforts. I also just want to make a quick comment. There was mention earlier about how when we chose not to have polling stations in the lobbies of apartment buildings this time, it was because we wanted to be more fair and equitable to all of the voters and not spend more money and time on a smaller group. But I would also comment that, the term equitable doesn't really mean equal. It doesn't mean equal amounts per voter. It means equitable. In other words, if there's an apartment building where most of the residents are seniors or people with mobility issues, then it would be equitable indeed to spend more money and time having a polling station in that lobby, even if it wasn't open to residents outside of that apartment building, because then more of those residents would be allowed to vote. So I just wanted to put that out there. With regard to Councillor Fernandez's motion that then I amended and now has been additionally, there's another motion. I support all of it, and I think that we're going to move forward here. I'm glad to see all of the comments put forth today.
Okay, I'm going to comment briefly so we're going to be voting on these parts separately. I just want to start by saying I will support Councillor Marsh and actually, I guess technically there's no seconder, so Councillor Marsh's motion. I do have some concerns about the biographical information part of it, because while in my mind I see linking to a website as not endorsement in any way, shape, or form by the city, it's simply a link. Once you post biographical information, I don't want to get in a situation where if biographical information is false, what's the mechanism for checking whether it's false or not. Are we supposed to put up something that's incorrect, etc.? So I'll vote in favor now, supposing that that information gets worked out. With respect to the second portion that's before us, I will support the first portion. I think that the annual progress report, I think it's cloudy in my opinion, and honestly I think it's somewhat beyond our purview, so I will be asked that part be voted on separately as well, and I will be voting against that. I think staff will bring back, the staff will already bring back the information well early enough for us to make changes that are within our purview. Recorded vote has been called, and the last portion I want to touch upon too is I just want to reiterate my point that I think, well, there's two things. First of all, voter turnout. I mean, it's one of those issues that has been around forever, and by that I mean there's some sense I'm getting from members of committee that we're worse off now than we have been. The reality is, and it was in the report, that the turnout was 3% higher than the last election in 2010, and further, that the turnout is actually on par with the 50-year average. So do I want to see more people come out? Absolutely. But I just want to be clear that it's not like we're seeing a downward trend. We're more seeing a flatline trend. And on that final point too, I do think that there's a real potential in almost having ultra preferred advanced polling date on a Saturday, hedging our bets against the province being able to move it to a PD day. And I think if we were really diligent in promoting that single day, letting members of the community follow up with other days, I think that would go far in helping us to increase voter turnout even further. Okay, so what we will do, this is a bit of a mess, but what we will do is, Councillor Fernandez it was included in the report, so there's no separate motion, right? Yeah. Okay. Get my bearings here. Okay, so what we will do first is we will vote on the amendment by Councillor Galloway Seelock, the first portion in front of us in quotes. Okay, so we're going to vote that staff bring back a report with respect to ways to increase voter turnout, which would specifically look at the potential of bringing back the voter turnout committee. Okay, recorded vote on everything has been called. Those in favor? And opposed? That carries. We will now be voting on the second clause of that, which is the annual staff coming back with an annual report. Could we bring it up on the screen again for a second? It's the second, this is the second clause of that right there. So the bottom quote that says, and that a progress report regarding the election be brought back annually. Those in favor? And opposed? That motion carries. And could we get Councillor Marsh's motion back on the screen, please? Okay, it's been asked to be voted on number 2 separately. Oh, number 3 separately, pardon me. Vote on number 3 separately. So we will vote on number 3 first. So that's permanent residents to vote in municipal elections. You may, Councillor Gazzola. Can you hit your button there?
I have concerns about that, but I'd like to know what we're really asking here. From what I understand, is you're looking for more information. We're not making a decision to allow permanent residents. We're looking at...
We're advocating to the province to include permanent residents. So we're not making the decision, we're asking the province to make the decision.
But we're making the decision that we want that.
Correct. That's what this motion says.
Okay, without really knowing the ramifications or whatever.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Mayor Vukanovich?
Well, I think to be clear, our past motion that granted was done during the last term of council, and I think what this one says is the potential to allow all permanent residents to vote in municipal elections. So I would presume that that means the province would engage in a process that would, see dialogue happen with municipalities, with citizens and so on, that could potentially lead to a mechanism that allows for permanent residents to vote. The province has also said, as an example, that they are looking at what's the word? Basically, where you can vote for your first choice, your second choice, and so on, as another option for the next election. So they're going to go through some sort of process as part of that, and I think that all that's asking for is that process happen on the issue of permanent residents, not that we are unequivocally supporting it already.
And that's a big difference, and I can appreciate that we're saying let's look at it, let's get more information on it, and that's fine. So then I can support it. Otherwise, if we're making a definite opinion on this at this time, before we've heard all of the sides, I would not vote in favor of it.
But I think we need to ask Councillor Marsh to clarify what her motion means.
Councillor Marsh?
In March 2014, the previous council voted unanimously to direct staff to and I'll just read it, that staff be directed to further investigate the City of Toronto initiative, including public consultation, requesting the province to enact further amendments to the Municipal Elections Act to allow all permanent residents to vote in municipal elections. So the preamble to my motion is that staff be directed, to participate in the consultations and advocacy initiatives. It's not to decide to say absolutely unequivocally we want to allow all permanent residents to vote in municipal elections at this time. That would come potentially later, right?
I want to clarify.
Okay.
So as to further investigate.
Yeah, and advocate. Yeah, but not necessarily to investigate, just to investigate. It's essentially, it's the wording is here and before you, and so, yeah. There's no word, actually the word is not, it's just potential, yeah.
Okay, so we're all clear? So we will vote on item number 3 first. Those in favor? And opposed? That carries. And the balance of the motion, understanding item 1, I think is somewhat redundant, but that's okay. It won't hurt. That's okay. Okay, voting is open. No, just number 3. Yeah. And that passes unanimously. Okay. A little messy, but we got through it. Just stretching, Councillor Brazil. Okay, we'll move on to item number 6. We are actually technically supposed to be finishing this committee right now. We do have a couple delegations to this item. It's the food truck follow-up. So actually, I didn't get a chance to check with staff. Did you want to speak first, or do you want to hear from the delegations? Okay, staff will speak first. Mr. Bloom.
Through the chair, if council will recall, we had discussions on food trucks in the core back in January, and you asked us to go away and have conversations on 2 separate items, one being lunch hour programming directly in the BI boundary, and number 2, food truck programming on Bright Up Street. So this report, there's recommendations on both of those items. I'll start with the first one, which is the lunchtime programming in the core. We invited every downtown restaurant and every operating food truck that's operated in Kitchener before to come out to a series of what ended up being 2 meetings to just see if there was a happy place where both sides could agree. And I'm happy to say that we've found that place. Ultimately, what those who participated, we had 7 restaurants and 8 food trucks. And they've generally agreed that for this year that we would not program Carlsbad Square with food trucks, but instead we would have 3 other locations. We would have Wednesday lunch hours and Friday lunch hours on the city's Gaukel Street parking lot. So that's the lot beside the studio project in formerly where Everest College was located. So that would be Wednesday and Friday lunch hours. And then Wednesday evenings, Trinity Church has agreed to allow the use of their parking lot beside the Duke Food Block so that we could have 2 food trucks at that location potentially on Wednesday evenings. So instead of 1 location being Carlsbad Square, we'd be looking at 3 locations, each which would be allowed to have 2 food trucks during those times. So the report really provides a bylaw amendment to enable us to carry that out if council so agrees. The second issue was consideration of food trucks being allowed to operate on Bright Up Street. We did consult with 3 of the restaurants in the area and heard back from one restaurant which their comment was, as you can probably appreciate, that because of Ion Construction, they've experienced a decrease in business and are sort of sensitive to any more impacts on their business. So initially our recommendation was to hold off on any provisions on Bright Up Street until construction was passed, to be sort of sensitive to the issues that those businesses are facing. What we've learned since publishing the report is there are tenants of the Bright Up block who are actually wanting to partner with food trucks for the food trucks to come on a weekly basis, essentially in cooperation with their company, as opposed to a general public offering more of a specific to their business. So in conversations with both the food trucks and the tenant, essentially what they're looking for is an opportunity for sort of 1 lunch hour a week to be able to have a food truck on Bright Up Street that would really cater to the people in that business, as opposed to just an open-ended opportunity any time of the day. So if council is interested in an option, and I think you'll hear more from that from some of the delegations, I do have a revised recommendation just to sort of help you understand the bylaw changes that would be needed. What we'd suggest is one of 2 options, or both. Either we identify a day and time and food trucks can operate in that window. So from my understanding, it's Wednesday lunch hours, so between 11 and 3, for example. Be very specific that's the window of opportunity. And 2 is the ability for them, should they want to operate on a different time or a different day of the week, that they could do so on a one-off promotional basis as a joint effort between a tenant and a restaurant, and that would be coordinated through the manager of licensing. So 2 provisions that in our mind don't necessarily create an open-ended opportunity for food trucks all of the time, but does allow these partnership opportunities to happen. So in sort of striking a balance between being sensitive to the business impacts, but also allowing opportunities for the food trucks to work with tenants. So with that, I'm open to questions, and I know you've got some delegations.
Okay, yeah, just before we get to the delegations, just one clarifying. So this is the preferred recommendation in front of us. But if council's so inclined to open it up, you said 2 different recommendations that you could bring forward.
Sure, okay. I'll put it on the board. And then
I would appreciate that, thank you. And we will hear from the delegations. The first delegation is Nadia Dragosanu, pardon me. Hello again, Nadia. You do have 5 minutes to make your presentation. I believe with about 30 seconds left, the clerk will ring a bell to let you know, okay?
Okay.
When you're ready.
Good day, Chair, Councilors, Mayor. Just wanted to start off by thanking city staff for facilitating the meeting between food truck operators and restaurant owners. It was a much needed step forward for us to finally see the 2 working together. Leading into the report, I just wanted to stress, when we're looking at what's recommended, always remember, we come to you to ask to help support growth, to stimulate growth and not restrict it, and help us stimulate our businesses. So based on the report, Corey did make clarifications. Initially, it was restricting our business on Bright Up. But with the new recommendation, it's now suggesting that we are allowed to operate on Wednesdays in partnership with the tenants. Our window of opportunity, again, it's limited to lunch hours, so that direct competition with restaurants in the area is very limited. And we understand that construction's happening, and we're sympathetic to that as well. But at the same time, we do have businesses to run, and we can't wait a year because our bills can't wait. So the recommendation put forward by Corey, we are in support of it. So keep Wednesdays open for food trucks to operate on Bright Up. And the other days of the week would be as requested by tenants. So you're still allowing us to operate where there's the need and we're being asked to. The other item I just wanted to touch on really quickly is just the financial implications that is on page 3. When we look at increasing annual fees next year, please consider that one location is taken away in place of another. So Carl Zare Square has been removed in place of Gawko. Also, you're looking at an increased number of food trucks getting annual licenses. That as well would go towards any implications. Also, vibrancy of downtown, having food trucks on Gawko, supporting that area would bring a sense of community. So when you're looking at increasing an annual license fee, consider these other items as well. And finally, I just wanted to mention that there are lots of changes happening in Kitchener. We can see it, but what we don't see is the inclusion of food trucks. We see construction happening. We don't see in the plans that there's anything in place to welcome food trucks. We feel that we're excluded, sometimes forgotten. So when there are changes to the infrastructure and the changes that are happening, what we would like to ask is to include in the plan a spot or site that would support food trucks and help us develop our businesses that way. So for us not to be forgotten. And that's all I have today. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions of the delegation? Councillor Ioannidis?
Oh, I don't have any questions for the delegation. I'm prepared to move it when the time comes.
Okay, you can keep back in. Mayor Verbenovich?
Thank you, and thanks for coming in. Just one quick question with respect to your last reference, where you say, when work is being done, I presume you're meaning infrastructure work and so on. Is there some specific examples you have in mind where something could have been considered and maybe it was missed?
Through the chair, it's looking forward to, with all the construction that we see for the LRT, and even developing businesses that are coming through and sites that are being developed, I think there is some opportunity for the plan to include sites for food trucks, something that may not have been thought of, but it's something that we could move forward and discuss further, and how we can integrate food trucks into the development that's happening currently.
Okay, one of the things that I'm cognizant of, and this certainly exists in other communities where food trucks are more permanent. Part of the infrastructure that's been put in place is using electrical plug-ins so that we're more environmentally friendly. Is that something that the sector would be amenable to doing if you had more permanent locations? Obviously, there would have to be the fee for the hydro and so on, but it's something that I think we need to move more towards as the industry has an opportunity to develop. Is there an openness to that?
Most definitely. When we look at operating our businesses, we always try to reduce our carbon footprint. So having a plug-in essentially would help us. There are some food trucks that aren't able to, but the majority of us are able to plug in, and we can always work through that sort of arrangement.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's something we could work with your group to sort of move towards an environment where we can phase that in over a number of years or something.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Marsh?
Thank you for coming in, for speaking. I was a little bit surprised that you said that you felt Kitchener has not welcomed food trucks. I was actually quite surprised because I was under the impression the last time that we saw delegates from the food truck group we were hearing a different message. And so can you just elaborate a bit more, aside from providing plug-in locations in future plans, what else would you like to see to make sure that you know that we welcome food trucks?
Right. Through the chair, just to clarify, my intention wasn't to say that we're not welcome versus the intention is to say, can we look at the current infrastructure and what's happening now and the changes and find a permanent solution to have food trucks as part of our community. We are welcome. We're welcome on an event basis and on private property, but we feel that exclusion, you would have a restaurant that is part of the BIA. We come in and out. We don't have that permanent fit in Kitchener.
You're asking to pay BIA fees?
Well,
no, I'm teasing. I'm trying to be, that's not fun. I'm trying to be lighthearted. I mean, I'm sure they would welcome that if you wanted to make an arrangement. But aside from that, I want to reiterate that in fact, food trucks are a welcome addition to the landscape of our city, and we would like to make sure that going forward that food trucks are not forgotten, and I hadn't seen that as even a potential. So thanks for bringing that to our attention.
Thank you.
Okay, and no further questions. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks.
And the second delegation is Mr. Brad Schmuck.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I'd just like to kind of elaborate on what Nadia has spoken about, and also some of the recommendations on here about Bright Up Street and the downtown spot to park for our 2 days a week. On the Bright Up Street one, I get that there's going to be some other restaurants that might not have. That might be down because of the LRT construction. But, I mean, now we're asked to compromise our business because they are losing their business, or potentially losing their business. So from our perspective as business owners, we don't get the opportunity to go there any day of the week. We have to go on Wednesdays or another day. So for us, or for me, it's difficult to say, all right, every Wednesday I can go there. But, I mean, if they're asking us to go there, I have an event on Wednesday at Workplace One, and they called me this morning in a frantic asking if we're allowed to do this because they've already promoted to their staff that we're coming there. So now we got to compromise our business to accommodate other people. So, I have a little bit of a problem with the way this is written and how we can go about running our business. So, if we can come to a compromise, I believe, the food trucks have compromised quite a bit in the last 2 years of us, our inception kind of into Kitchener. But we need to have, a little bit of leeway here of where we can operate. I don't believe that you regulate any other business in Kitchener when they can operate. The days they can operate, the hours they can operate. So why are we subject to this kind of regulation? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me as a business owner that I'm only allowed to operate on Wednesdays or I'm only allowed to operate on a Friday. Like, I can operate 7 days a week. I'm fully capable of doing that. So why am I being limited to where I can operate and when I can operate? I still have a problem with it. And after, this is my third season in business, and we're still kind of at the same point as when we started. There's not a lot of opportunity in downtown Kitchener, even though we've compromised. Now we're moving locations, and if you want me to break down the Gaukel Street location, there's 2 days a week, which equals 4 trucks for 3 hours a day, and our season runs basically from May till September. So if you break it down, that's 80 services that we need to have, and there's 16 food trucks now. So basically, I'm allowed to go there once a month. I don't know any other business that can operate on once a month. So, you know, it's kind of difficult for me to say, all right, this is great. You know, this is a compromise, but it looks like we're the only ones being compromised here. So, you know, along those lines, I mean, if you break it down in a whole year, I would be working for 15 hours in downtown Kitchener. I mean, it doesn't make economical sense for me to run a business like that. So I think some compromise needs to be, you know, happen by other people other than us. You know, and to go back to the Bright Up location, I mean, I think we can, you know, work with Workplace One there and have a food truck there when they request it. But I think it needs to be written that, you know, we don't have to go for a special events permit. We don't need to go and make sure that we tell someone that we're going there. I think if we can operate there, we need to write it that we can operate there. I mean, they don't want us parking in their parking lot. They want us in a convenient spot close to their businesses on the street. So I think we need to have, you know, the transportation services staff said it's okay. So I mean, I don't understand why we have to compromise our business again in order for us to generate our income for our you know, our business. You know, another point I'd like to make is the industrial zones. They, you know, I don't know the correct zoning for B3, B4, M3, but, you know, as a restaurant, you can deliver food.
So, could you turn Mr. Schmuck back on?
Good?
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
As a restaurant, you can deliver food anywhere. But for me, I can only operate in these certain locations. So I get that if I was setting up on a permanent location, I would need to have the right bylaws and zoning in effect. But if I am asked by a business in an industrial zone to go there and sell to their staff, why I'm not allowed to do that, I don't understand. I mean, as a restaurant, I can deliver food there as if I wanted to deliver pizza or whatever it is that the restaurant does. They can certainly prepare it and deliver it there. My method of delivery is a little bit different, whereas I set up there and I deliver it to their staff. So, and I get if it was a permanent location, if I was set up there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would need to be on the right type of property. But if I'm going there for a lunch hour, then I need to be able to go there for a lunch hour. I cannot say to these people, I'm sorry, the bylaws don't allow me to come and sell to your staff when they're asking me to do it. So I think some consideration needs to be brought up on that fact of the different zonings that we can operate on. And that's all I have for today.
Okay, thank you. There are some questions. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Schmuck, for coming in and for sharing your thoughts. A couple questions for you. First of all, were you one of the food truck operators that present at the meeting or meetings that are referenced
With
in the report?
the downtown BIA, I was not. No, I had prior obligations on both those meetings that I cannot attend the meeting, so no.
So would you say it's fair to say then that you don't agree with what your colleagues and the restaurant owners agreed to at those meetings?
I just think we're compromising a lot more than everyone else to operate for what I explained, essentially 15 hours a year.
Okay. But in the report it says that in general all in attendance agreed on the...
We obviously caved in so we're able to operate, right? Otherwise we can't operate if we don't, you know, compromise with what's put forth from us. What happened was, you know, I'd like to see it 7 days a week that we can operate there. But, you know, they want us to schedule that. And I don't think it's right that we have to schedule 5 days a week, in the downtown. It should be a first come, first serve. Here you go. If you want a special day, then we market that special day, and you can schedule that special day. But as a business, I mean, you can't tell me when I can operate, where I can operate, and how I can operate, right? Like, I'm trying to run a business here, and it seems to be handcuffed from different perspectives. So
I appreciate your perspective, and I understand the frustration. I just I would like to also, offer you that, we're not actually limiting as to when you can operate. It's more about, it's just as to where. And what I understand is one of the main benefits of having a food truck is you're on wheels. You can go to where the customers are rather than wait for them to come to you. And I appreciate that you're saying that it's important to be present in the downtown. You want to be there all the time. But at the same time, we do have a number of restaurants in the downtown already that do struggle currently with the fact that we have the construction going on and the competition that already exists within the core without the addition of the food trucks. And I have heard from many restaurateurs that they do welcome food trucks, but would be cautious about welcoming them as you're suggesting all the time. So I don't. There has been some compromise on both sides, from my understanding. But regardless, one more question: what's with Wednesdays? Why are Wednesdays the day that is one of the days of the week for downtown at lunch hour, and then is the day after 4 p.m., and then is the day for Bright Up Food Block? Wednesdays are going to be a pretty busy food truck day, whereas why not spread it out a little bit more?
Well, we could spread it out if we were allowed to operate 5 days a week in downtown Kitchener. But, we all have different schedules and there's always something going on. So, Wednesday, everyone didn't get together and pick Wednesdays. I think it just happened that way because it's the middle of the week. But, from my experiences, a Tuesday can be better than a Friday. Like, you can't guarantee what day you're going to be busy. Why Bright Up wants Wednesdays, I don't know if they wanted Wednesdays or what, but that's the day they've chosen to have food trucks there. But, that's not to say that we can't go there on a Monday or a Thursday or a Friday. If they change their mind, in the middle of August that they want food trucks there on a Thursday, I think we should be allowed to go there on a Thursday, right? I don't think we should be set in stone as you can only operate on Wednesdays.
Which day of the week? I would agree with you there. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Schneider.
Yes, thanks for coming in. I just, want you to be able to see things maybe from what it's like from sitting in this chair, where we're trying to balance the needs of our bricks and mortar restaurants who have to pay rent and taxes and utilities and wages to staff and provide washroom facilities. Can you understand maybe where they're coming from, where they want to maybe protect a little bit of their area?
I have to pay all those things as well.
You're paying all these things as well? Taxes, a fee, and ongoing taxes?
Yeah. So how is it any different from my business to their business? We all have the same expenses as a business. They might not be the same in denomination-wise, but we still have all the same expenses.
I think theirs might be a bit higher. We're trying to find.
Regardless of high or not, an 800 square foot quick service restaurant doesn't pay the same as a 10,000 square foot sit down restaurant. So it's not the same playing field, obviously, when you're talking about wages. I'm 145 square feet. So I need to store my truck. I need to pay my utilities. I need to pay my staff to serve the food. I need to pay myself. I need to have money to pay my mortgage. I have all the same expenses as every other business owner out there. So I don't see why, just because I have a mobile business, doesn't mean I don't have the same expenses as other people.
Okay. But you also have the ability to go where restaurants aren't. There's a lot of untapped potential.
Well, a restaurant can start a food truck. As you can see, there is 5 restaurants in the area that have now started food trucks. So if they want to be mobile, they can certainly buy a food truck and run a food truck. I mean, we're not inhibiting where they can operate as well. I mean, my end goal isn't just to run a food truck. It was my starting goal. It's where I started. This is where I am right now. I want to get up to here. In order to get up to here, we need to have a level playing field, as I've heard in the past. So, I mean, the way this is written isn't really a level playing field for my business. Even though I am mobile and I can be convenient, I mean, there's opportunity for restaurants to do the same. So, I mean, it's not like we're telling the restaurants they can't do the same thing.
But it's an extra expense for them. All I'm saying is we're really trying hard to find a balance, because I also see the benefit and the vibrancy and vitality that the food trucks bring. You know, at this meeting, though, it appears like with 7 restaurants and 8 food trucks that there was a general agreement that this is okay.
Yeah, we had to compromise, and I don't believe in that compromise. I'm telling you, we need to operate on a regular basis. This is our compromise, and when we came up with that, I mean, by the way this is written, when are we going to be allowed to operate full time? I don't see an end goal here. It's now we're going to try it, and next year we're going to move to 3 days a week. And then the year after that, we go to 4 days a week, and when are we going to get to 7 days a week where I can operate my business? That's all I'm asking.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis?
Yes, through you, Chair Davey. Thanks, Mr. Schmuck, for coming in. My question is for the Bright Up situation. When you're looking at items 1 and 2 here that are up there, can you quickly look at that and see whether or not item number 2 would be acceptable to you?
What page is it on?
It's on the screen up front up here.
Oh, I don't have to. Like we can operate on the parking lot is basically what it's saying.
Basically, where I'm leaning towards is number 2, because it's going to allow the business to be able to contact you and you to able to service them, and that's my concern for you guys, and that's where I want to see that move forward. And is this satisfactory to you?
Yeah, I mean, if they can contact the food truck and we're allowed to operate there whenever they contact us to operate, then I think that's a fair compromise for us. It's a tough pill to swallow that there's not that many spots to park in Kitchener. So,
okay.
But yeah, that's a compromise that can work, and we can move forward from that.
My other question is dealing with, you had mentioned about industrial areas, and my understanding is, and it's still understanding, it's dealing with zoning. So the issue is, if there's a commercial area or in the industrial part that if it's not zoned for a restaurant, you can't serve. That's correct? That's your
correct,
concern?
Yeah. Other than the Huron Business Park, where the Huron Business Park, we're allowed to operate on any property within that business park, regardless of zoning, with permission from the owners.
Okay. I'm going to have a question of staff on that one in a bit. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Mayor Vujanovich.
Thank you very much, and thanks for coming in, Mr. Schmuck. I understand the issues and concerns that you're raising, and we're really trying to find a balance between being supportive of food trucks, which, as you know, I think I have historically have been, and council has tried to be, and also address the issues and concerns of our brick and mortar establishments who, while I acknowledge you obviously incur fees as well, they've made substantive investments that have much higher fees attached to them, and in some instances don't have the same flexibility that food trucks do. So I guess all I'm trying to say, and building on the points that Councillor Schneider and others have tried to make, is we're trying to find that right balance, and I think where we're going is certainly moving us in the right direction. That yes, one day I think we will get to that point, but it's trying to phase that in while we recognize there continues to be some challenges in the central business district. I guess my question to you, and in the comments that you're making, are you aware that when we talk about these restrictions, we're only talking about them as far as public property goes? If there's a property that's zoned for it, you're eligible to go and operate on there 7 days a week. So if you can find property owners that have the zoning and are willing to allow you to be there, you can be there all the time. Are you aware of that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I know that, except in the BIA area.
Right.
So,
okay.
I mean, and I get that part of it, and believe me, I'm looking for spots all over the place to park, and we're all looking for spots all over the place. That's not the issue I was addressing. It's what was brought forth on this, and I just wanted to enlighten everyone on how many hours we're actually eligible to work with the amount of food trucks that we have in that location on Gaukel Street and Joseph there. So, and I get that we can operate on properties that are zoned. There's also an issue. There's not many properties zoned for what we can do that doesn't already have existing businesses on it, right? Either a restaurant or another business that doesn't want to have a food business there. So, I mean, I'm always looking for different opportunities. The industrial part of it is I've had lots of people ask me to do this, and it's tough for me to say, no, I can't bring my business there because it doesn't allow me to.
Right.
Like, I don't want to break the law to, pay for my services to them, right? They're asking me to do this. So, I mean, it's out there. They want it. We just have to write it properly so we can do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
No further questions, Mr. Schmuck. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Okay, questions of staff. Councillor Hernandez.
Yes, I want to further elaborate on that, and I wonder if Corey can give us a better perspective, because that was my thought on that they were able to operate in such as what Mr. Schmuck was saying.
Through the chair, perhaps if you can just restate the question, just because there was a few thought processes behind.
Okay, when it's concerning with the industrial areas, etc., or even throughout the city, whether it's they're able to operate if the business there requests them.
Right. So through the chair, yes. If there's a property zoned for a restaurant and there isn't a neighboring property that has a restaurant, because we have a 10-meter separation, which basically means as long as you don't have a neighboring property with a restaurant, then that private property owner can allow them onto their property, and that's part of the bylaw. So that's sort of almost as of right, if you so to speak. So that includes all of our commercial areas, King Street, Victoria Street, etc., as well as the industrial zones that we've listed in the report, plus the Huron Business Park. So that there is a fairly significant amount of land out there for them to pursue. It's a question of finding the one that fits those parameters.
Okay, so it seems like it's there then.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I don't have any further questions.
Before you click off, you did indicate you wanted to move something.
Yes, I'm prepared to move staff's recommendation with the addition of item number 2.
Okay, so to clarify then, so staff's recommendation on paper and only item number 2 on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, not item number 1 on the screen?
No.
Okay.
Because it's sort of redundant.
Yeah, but just clarifying. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Corey. Corey, I was at one of the meetings with food truck operators and the brick and mortar restaurants. Seemed fairly friendly and cooperative. The meeting went well. Can you tell me if how many people were at that meeting and just reinforce that they agreed to what you have here?
Through the chair, there were 7 restaurants and 8 food trucks represented. And then the follow-up meeting was a subset of that. Not everybody who attended the first meeting was able to attend the second meeting. But certainly from both sides, what we understand is that those that attended the second meeting went back to their comrades who didn't show up for the first meeting. So generally speaking, there was a level of agreement both on the restaurant and the food truck side. But I think it's clear to say that not every restaurant downtown is going to be in agreement with this, and I think what we heard is not every food truck is in agreement with it, but generally the ones that took the time to show up and work collaboratively, by and large, are supportive of this on both the food truck side and the restaurant side.
Thank you.
Okay, and just before we continue, Councillor Anna is just looking at the motion, so we would need to also remove the fourth paragraph in staff's recommendation, I believe, because that's contradictory. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
I'm not sure. Can you just elaborate on what you mean before my time starts? Which paragraph would we have to eliminate?
Okay, so on the, I'll pause your time here. On the recommendation from staff in front of you, there's 4 paragraphs.
Oh.
Okay, like for
that.
those.
Okay, I understand
the third one down is out, and item number 2 on the screen in front of us is in. I don't think there's any other contradictions, but I would look to that those are questions that we can work out after.
So just to clarify, Mr. Bloom, isn't item 1 also required because item 2 refers to a one-time collaborative event, whereas item 1 would be a one-day-a-week permission?
So maybe I'll just back everything up. So what's on screen, recommendation 1 and 2 match recommendations 1 and 2 in the report. Recommendations 3 and 4 on the screen. So 3 being including sub I and sub 2, just so we're clear. So 3 and 4 on the screen would replace 3 and 4 in the report. 3 is essentially a replacement, and 4 is slightly modified from the recommendation and staff. So I think what's on the table is 1 and 2 from, basically what's on the screen is 1 and 2 from the original report, and 3 and 4 being revised.
Okay.
Just so we're clear.
All right. Question of staff, a couple things. What's with Wednesdays? Like, can we expand it from Wednesdays and Fridays? Should the food truck operators want?
Through the chair, during the discussions, I mean, part of the issue that they were discussing was that these food trucks operate in different locations all throughout the week. The R&T Park has programming on certain days. There's a variety of locations that they operate, and what made sense was 2 days, 2 locations, and Wednesdays and Fridays happened to be the 2 days that the groups picked. Okay. The Wednesday at the Bread Up Block, that was not chosen by us. That was the day that the tenants of the Bread Up Block were interested in. I think it just all happened to fall on Wednesdays.
Okay. Regarding the Duke Street food block in particular, the Wednesdays after 4 p.m., are all of the Duke Street food block restaurateurs aware of that and in agreement with it?
Through the chair, they're all aware of it. I believe all but one is generally supportive, and I don't know if that one is or isn't. I'm just taking this from the one restaurant who's trying to coordinate this. But what he is trying to do is, so he's operating it on evenings, and most of the businesses are closed on evenings, so this wouldn't necessarily be an impingement on anybody's operating hours as is. So most of them are actually planning on staying open longer than they normally would to participate in the event. So one business may not participate, but the rest are all, from what I understand, supportive. Okay. Well, I hesitate to support that. I would like to have more of a conversation with that one that is not in agreement. But anyhow, just wondering regarding industrial zones or private properties where food trucks can go to. Is there any opportunity for the food truck operators to have a map of where those are and to outreach to businesses to say, hey, we're open for business, we want to come? I'm asking, I guess, just is there some coordinated effort on the part of the food truck operators to move forward in that regard? Through the chair, I do believe the clerk's department does have a map that is available to either a food truck or a private property owner. Anybody who wants to know where a food truck could occur within the bounds of the bylaw, they provide that to those folks. Okay.
And so regarding another location, had you explored when you were looking at extending food truck operation beyond the borders of the BIA? What about Otto Street and near the regional building parking area where there are very few restaurants available but many employees? Was that a location that you looked at?
Through the chair, that's actually as of right in the existing bylaw. That was enabled last year, so that is a location that is available for food trucks any time of the week. There's no limitations other than, I think, the length of stay. So that's still available for any of the food truck operators.
That would be, if I had a food truck, that would look like an attractive location. But all right, and one other thing: if food truck operators or restaurateurs, for that matter, were unable to make it to your meetings that you held, did they have an opportunity to provide you with feedback before the creation of this report in any other means?
Through the chair, when we did our initial reach out, we asked, are they attended, and if not, to follow up with us, and nobody replied, or any who did, which I don't think we actually had any who replied, who couldn't make it, asked for further follow-up, so we did provide that option for them.
I think it's a shame that we're here at this point where we have opposition to what you clearly worked hard to try and find some kind of collaborative agreement, and now we have opposition at this point when I would have liked to see that be voiced earlier so that the opinions could be incorporated into your recommendation. Thank you.
Mayor Verbenovich.
Thank you. And one question of staff on this issue of zoned properties and the distance separation. Can you remind me what that means, for example, on shopping plaza property as an example? So if I think of a large shopping plaza, perhaps it has one food service restaurant there, but the property owner is willing to allow a food truck to come on another piece of the property. It's 10 meters away from the existing standalone location, but on the same piece of property. What would happen in those circumstances?
Pardon me, Ms. Harris?
The bylaw was changed that it's 10 meters from a building to building.
Okay, so we're covered off there, in other words. Okay, that's certainly encouraging to hear. And then the second part, Councillor Marsh was trying to go there with respect to number one. Councillor Ioannidis, can you explain to me why you're not including item number one? Because it would seem to me that there appears to be an interest in being able to be there once a week regularly.
Well, the reason why I didn't pick number one is because out of concern for the brick and mortar, which is when I'm looking at number two, I'm going to strike out one-time collaboration. If the businesses there want to have the food truck there for their own personal, I have no issue with that. And I think if they're going to sign an agreement that they come there once a week or twice a week, that's their prerogative. So I don't think you need to have a specific time.
Okay, I see what you're saying. That's fine. And then I guess the other piece there for the manager of licensing is that the motion talks about the property owner has provided the written authorization. Does it need to be the property owner, or does it need to be the business that's actually trying to get them there? I'm guessing, I'm trying to make sure that we're not having too much bureaucracy where, they need to go to their property owner who then needs to come to us.
Okay, I'll go to Ms. Harris first.
Traditionally, we require the property owner to give permission for a food truck or any type of refreshment vehicle to be on their property.
So,
okay, and Mr. Bloom, do you want to add?
Sure. And just to clarify, the way we've written number two is they would have one of two options: either on street, don't need property owner permission, or in the parking lot with property owner permission. We've built this in the event that they find on a regular, whenever they're going to go, that the on-street parking spaces are all taken and there's no place to park, and they needed to go on a private parking lot. We would just want the owner's condolence.
Okay, so I guess, so would it be enough if the owner of 20 Bright Up came to us and just gave a blanket letter for the year saying, if any of my businesses want one, is that enough for the whole year, and then you can just deal with them deal with the tenants individually?
Ms. Harris?
Yes, the property owner came with one letter on their stationery that said they gave permission for a food truck to be at this location. One letter for the year would suffice.
Okay, that's fine. I will then just very briefly support the motion with the addition of item number 2. I understand that it's frustrating to at times see this being phased in, but I also recognize that we continue to make more and more progress where food trucks will eventually become just part of the normal operating arrangements that exist in the city for them as they do for brick and mortar and other types of businesses. It is a phased-in approach, but I think it is trying to find that balance, and I appreciate everyone's efforts. While I recognize that it may not be unanimous, I appreciate the majority's efforts in trying to find a compromise position that's workable for the majority.
Clarification, Councillor Marsh.
So a couple times I think we've tried to understand number 2 of the amendment, and I'm still struggling here. Based on Ms. Harris's answer, it sounds like a one-time letter could allow food trucks to operate on a weekly basis at 20 Breadup Street or on the on-street parking areas. But in this number 2, we have the wording that says a one-time collaborative event. And I want to make sure that what we're voting on doesn't then prohibit more than a one-time collaborative event to take place. You're striking out the one-time. Can we do that on the screen then so we can...
Okay, and Mr. Bloom, to add while we're...
I had a thought of clarification, but perhaps it's escaped me.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. I was confused by that part as well. So the one time is being struck. Okay. Yeah, Councillor Yaneski.
Mine's slightly different from, in terms of the discussion that we have, is more of a question of trying to understand that even though the report has come back and addresses the various issues of this, and I'm prepared to support it. The question comes down to is that I noticed from the previous time we had the discussion on the food trucks, there's reference made to Belmont Village, and we were looking at the business people were looking there to have food trucks appear there for certain events, and there's no reference to this in the report. I'm just wondering, if you can help me out, why?
Ms. Harris?
When we looked at Belmont Village, the Belmont Village BIA came back to staff and said they're not interested in food trucks in Belmont Village except for special events. And they can come in, food trucks can be in Belmont Village if the BIA invites them there with a special event license. The Belmont Village Business Association is concerned with their bricks and mortars as well. They want to protect their restaurants in that village. So they're interested strictly in food trucks for special events at this time.
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, and it was for special events. So that would still be permitted then?
Yeah, that doesn't have to be written in the bylaw because they can have a special event in Belmont Village with a special event license.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bloom, do you want to add?
Just wanted to make sure council's clear about the modification that's written now on the bylaw. Could allow a food truck to partner up with a tenant, and the tenant could authorize the food truck to be in that parking lot 5 days a week, all the time. I just want to make sure you're aware that by changing that allows that opportunity to happen.
Okay, and Councillor Inez.
Yeah, I understand this is a difficult situation that we've been dealing with for about 3 years now, and I think if we had this fulsome discussion with our brick and mortar 3 years ago, we probably would be a little further ahead than where we are today. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So I still want to be cognizant and still want to do a little bit of a baby step forward with this, and that's why I'm supporting the motion that's being put forward and the other amendment as well, item 2, because I think it gives you another spot to provide your services. And I'm all about having, if a business wants you guys there and it's not affecting other businesses, you guys should have the right to be there. And I agree with you on that totally. So again, I want to appreciate the cooperation among the brick and mortar and the food trucks. I know it's not what you guys want fully, but I think we're going to get there. It's just another baby step. So with that, I hope everyone will support the recommendation.
Okay, I just have one question. Apologies if I lost it. I've been doing something else. But so in the report, it says that there was one brick and mortar business that indicated they've experienced significant loss in customer traffic since the start of Ion Construction and weren't supportive of food truck on Bright Up Street until afterwards. Was this particular business, were they provided an indication of staff's original recommendation? Ms. Harris?
Yes, they were provided with the original report.
Okay, so is it possible then that they didn't bother attending today to speak on their behalf because they assumed that staff's recommendation was going to go forward?
We did tell them that the food trucks were going to be here regarding Bright Up Street, that they weren't necessarily in agreement with the amendment. The fact that the meeting was at 12:30 may have hindered the owner being able to come today, but he was informed that the resolution was going to be changing, may be changing.
Okay, thank you. So the motion is before us. Moved by Councillor Ioannidis. Those in favor? And opposed? I'm also opposed. Okay, thank you very much. That concludes Finance and Corporate Services. We will take a 10-minute recess. We will reconvene at 4 o'clock for Planning and Strategic Initiatives. Thank you.